right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. I feel like I need a nap on your couch.
That sounds weird,
nice.
But it makes sense if you watch the whole program. So Molly's getting a couch delivered. It's a beautiful couch. She showed us a video. It's been a drama getting it into our elevator.
Yes.
And John Tucker's also tired. That's like catching you up.
Thank you for the backstory.
You're welcome.
It's very important.
Did you post it on TikTok or whatever?
No. I've kept this very close to the chest. I
bet a video of your couch would be huge.
It could go viral, you think?
Oh, sure.
Oh my God, I'd have to ask the company then to make me like some kind of official ambassador and get a kickback on this.
I mean, it's a pretty cool couch.
It is a pretty cool couch.
I'm Alex Steele, Molly Smith in for Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news covered by Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover about 2,000 companies, 130 industries worldwide. We also give you all the wonderful, amazing entrepreneurial reporting that we do here at Bloomberg. And it is an exciting day, particularly if you like space. So Bloomberg Space is the newest editorial franchise within our far-reaching newsroom, and it's launching today. And it brings together the best reporters and editors in the game, including Lauren Crush, Bruce Einhorn, Kate Duffy, Todd Shields, and Eric Johnson to deliver some hard-hitting enterprise scoops, documentaries, photography, and podcasts all about ... the business of space. So for more inside stories of investments beyond Earth, from satellite networks to moon landings, you can visit Bloomberg.com/space for more. And one of the stories being featured is being included in the special section of the Bloomberg Business Week magazine titled "Musk and Bezos Are Racing to Bring Americans Back to the Moon." It discusses how NASA's hopes for a return to the moon depend on Elon Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin. Here to discuss all of this with us is Lauren Grush, Bloomberg U.S. space reporter. First of all, congrats on launching the vertical. That's no small feat. Definitely looking into that. I did a half-hour special on space once, and I loved it. It was so interesting. So thanks for doing that.
And also, just to quickly confirm, this does not mean that Bloomberg is launching anything into space. We are launching a vertical on a website about space.
It's hilarious how many people thought we might actually be sending something to space, but no.
Do people really think that? That's awesome.
Launching space content,
So let's talk about launching humans into space. If you're looking at Blue Origin or SpaceX, how is NASA taking a different approach to Blue Origin and SpaceX this time around?
Right. So NASA is very intent on sending people back to the moon for its Artemis program. Its goal is to send the first woman and the first person of color to the lunar surface. But the other main goal is to start a sustainable presence on the lunar surface, other than, as opposed to the Apollo missions, where we just kind of went, we left flags and footprints, and then we came back and we were done. And part of that is stimulating commercial companies to create hardware that NASA can use to send people to the moon. And then those companies can use that hardware to potentially turn a profit. And the big high-profile companies are, of course, Elon Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin, which have both been tapped to create the lunar landers that will be used to carry humans to and from the lunar surface.
So, Lauren, I got to ask, as one of these mere Earth links here, why is this important to send people to the moon beyond just having the flags and the footprints? Like, what is the, real useful takeaway from having a presence on the moon?
Well, of course, there's the geopolitical one. NASA has a lot of partnerships with countries all over the world, and Artemis is definitely a global program. So it's a way for us to foster, these relationships with companies that want to send vehicles and hardware to space. And then additionally, it's kind of a proving ground. NASA is hoping to eventually send humans to Mars someday. And the idea is that by living and working on the moon, they can, come up with new technologies, new processes that they'll eventually use to send humans to the red planet.
I guess I still just wonder, though, how is that, useful, besides just saying, we went to space? What's there to be? I don't know. Am I missing it?
No, that is part of the use. Obviously there are concerns about China also sending people to the moon. NASA, doesn't want... there is a bit of a race in that aspect, but at the same time, there are all these kind of side benefits that come from sending people to the moon. A lot of the technologies that we use here on Earth have come from space exploration, and so by, making this a goal, there are going to be all of these side benefits that trickle down to us. And then, of course, there's the inspirational element of it too. Seeing a woman walk on the moon will definitely inspire many young women to hopefully want to become astronauts or join the space industry someday.
Well, and for a while, no one seemed to care about space launches anymore. Like that was 60s and 70s, and we stopped kind of caring. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk made it all really cool and sexy again. And now when we have a space launch, we take it and we talk about it and we own that. We have a vertical about it. I mean, now it's becoming something that that is inspirational again. What company do you think is going to be the first to land humans on the moon?
Well, that's a great question, and obviously something that we're going to watch over the next decade or so. As of this moment, SpaceX is technically in the front running. They're supposed to land humans on the moon as early as 2026. I think a lot of people are skeptical about that date just because of the amount of technical things that they have to overcome, the challenges they have. There's a lot of technology development they have to do. And also the deadline for their human lunar landing has changed a few times before. Blue Origin says that they're hoping to land humans as early as 2029, which may be a more realistic date. However, they are looking to land a cargo version of their vehicle on the moon as early as next year. SpaceX is also hoping to do an uncrewed landing of their hardware on the moon as early as next year. So it's anyone's game at that moment to see who can actually land something on the moon. But whoever does, if that is Blue Origin, it'll be a bit of a shot across the bow, if you will, because Blue Origin has had execution problems, whereas SpaceX is obviously quite famous for rapidly launching and iterating and moving forward with its programs.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren. We really appreciate it. Congrats on the article. Congrats on launching the vertical. No small feat. Lauren Crush joins us, now called Space Reporter for Bloomberg. And for more inside stories of investments beyond Earth, from satellite networks to moon landing, visits bloomberg.com/space for more. So I'm taking it.
She's got a nice couch, by the way, in the background on YouTube. Very nice
I don't
couch.
see how the couch is relevant to space. It's not going up there.
You go to
staying on Earth.
space, you go to Mars, you want a nice couch.
My couch is staying on Earth. It's getting in this apartment one way or another.
Okay, so you would not be on board for literally going to space. This is not your jam?
I mean, look, if someone's going to pay, the million or whatever dollars for my ticket, I'm sure it's more than $1 million. I'll be the beneficiary of that. But I don't know. I still do struggle to see what's the utility of going to space. Am I missing it?
Yeah,
I get the whole inspirational
aspect
of it, wow, this is so great, and the images of Armstrong with the flag, but why is this useful for us here on Earth? Besides, it's cool. Has anyone answered it? Did I miss it?
I mean, I think it's learning. I think it's learning stuff.
Could you imagine
and then you're
the
gonna learn more about
technology
life on
and how
Earth.
that's advanced and how we can build new couches based on what we learn in space?
Actually,
Ignore
the
me.
last lunar landing
John.
made her couch. They built it in space. That's why it's taken so long. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And let's do company news instead of the business flash. Looking at some of the companies making news today. When Oracle spent $28 billion 2 years ago to acquire electronic records company Cerner Corporation, it promised a revolution in healthcare technology. The co-founder and chair, Larry Ellison, declared the deal would help fix many of the industry's ills by modernizing notoriously dated systems, and would also create a major growth engine for his company's earnings as well. Instead, interviews with more than 30 current and former employees and customers show the software maker has lost at least a dozen of Cerner's big clients. Oracle engineers apparently were surprised by the amount of effort required to implement changes. For years, U.S. states have dangled tax breaks to help lower data centers, eager for the investment in jobs and also the cachet of reeling in big-name tech companies like Apple, Facebook, and Google. And now in the midst of an artificial intelligence-fueled building boom, these incentives are coming under greater scrutiny from politicians of both parties. At issue is these nerve centers of digital age typically employ just a few dozen workers. To run one, all that's needed is a skeleton crew that includes some technicians, security personnel, and building control specialists. And finally, from the Journal, when the U.S. accused Binance last year of maximizing profits over protecting users, the company promised unceasing efforts to deliver a safe and trusted platform. That was put to the test soon after when an internal investigation found a top client, a firm run by a Lamborghini-loving crypto trader, was manipulating markets. The result, Binance kept the client and fired the investigator. And that's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Friday Eve. I'm Alex Steele alongside Molly Smith. Paul Sweeney is out today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news in business and finance with our 400 analysts that cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries. Numbers are hard to get right, guys. We also cover all the news, world and national and otherwise. And for that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Molly, John. Stormy Daniels got a grilling by Trump defense attorney Susan Necklace on the witness stand today in Donald Trump's hush money trial in Manhattan. The former president accused of falsifying business records before the 2016 election, tied to buying off the adult film actress over a sexual encounter he denies. Trump spoke to reporters briefly before heading into the courtroom.
This is purely and simply election interference. There is no case. So that's the way it is, but here we sit after 2.5 weeks, and I think you'll see some very revealing things today.
However, Daniels didn't budge during cross-examination. Necklace suggested that Daniels, as an actress in adult films, was well-practiced in making up stories about sex. Daniels responded, "The sex in the films is very real, just like what happened to me in that room." President Joe Biden said that he would halt additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if the country launched a ground invasion of Rafah, decrying the potential loss of civilian life as just wrong. Biden made his comments to CNN. The rate of guns stolen from cars in the U.S. has tripled over the last decade, making them the largest source of stolen guns in the country. That's according to an analysis of FBI data by the gun safety group Everytown. The report states the rate of stolen guns from cars climbed nearly every year and spiked during the coronavirus pandemic, along with a major surge in weapons purchases in the U.S. Sarah Bird-Sharps is Everytown's senior research director.
We found a really strong relationship between states with strong gun laws and far, far fewer guns stolen from cars. So what that tells us is that these laws are really working to help keep our communities safe.
And it should be noted that Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Molly, John.
All right, thank you so much, Michael Barr. So imagine this, guys. You take off your 2 weeks in the summer. You're looking for a nice, warm getaway. Sit in a bathing suit, sip some cocktails, look at some culture. How about Norway? Or Austria.
I want to look up what the Norway temperature is in the summer. It says that right now it's 61 Fahrenheit. That sounds pretty nice.
So apparently, this comes from the journal, the new summer hotspots are cooler destinations like Norway, because you got the record-breaking heat waves that happen with increasing frequency. So more travelers are finding that traditional summer hotspots like Paris or the Pacific Northwest hold the potential for sweltering, sweaty trips. And this has prompted tourists to seek cooler ground like Bergen, Norway, and Innsbruck in Austria. I don't know. I've never considered that before.
What about Antarctica? That seems like the perfect spot to go to avoid the heat waves.
Well,
I mean, how
I
warm
went
does
there
it
in
get?
Antarctica summer, which is our winter. So that's the key difference. You wouldn't want to go there in our summer when it is dark 24/7.
I mean, maybe that sounds great for Tucker. Get some sleep.
Oh,
I mean,
what's
you
the
could be
average-
assured
when
it
you
would be
went
cold.
for the Antarctic summer, what was the temperature?
I think, most days it was like in the low 30s and like we had 20 hours of daylight. It was beautiful.
Oh, 30s Fahrenheit?
That's correct.
No thanks.
This is beautiful. Are you kidding? This is as good as it gets for
No.
Antarctica.
Did you lie on the beach and you're,
I personally didn't, but the penguins and the seals did. They were out sunbathing. They loved it.
See, this is why I stayed too daggone long in this studio, man, listening to this one. 30-something degrees and people are on the beach?
No, I think
Not
he's kidding.
people, penguins. Penguins
Same
in
thing.
Antarctica.
Well, you were on the beach, but probably with a big coat.
I was with a
Little
bit more
people
gear. The
wearing
penguins were
tuxedos.
out just like fanning themselves, really just soaking up the sun. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, you could do that, or you could go to Norway apparently and skip Paris. I mean, to be fair, they don't do air conditioning well. Molly, wonderful, always a pleasure. She's the best. Molly
nice.
Smith joining us there. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is up next.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Joe Biden stands by his red line. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As the president promises to withhold additional weapons shipments to Israel if Israel pursues a ground invasion of Rafah. We'll have more on the president's rationale coming up with Bloomberg's White House correspondent Jordan Fabian. Insights from Kelly Grieco at the Stimson Center. Mike Johnson, still Speaker of the House today. We'll talk about how long that might last with Bloomberg's Mike Dorning and what's left on the agenda. And as Donald Trump gets back into a courtroom today with Stormy Daniels, we'll have analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us here on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. We start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Midday trading now with Charlie Pellet in New York. Charlie, how's it look?
Yeah, we are higher across the board. Joe Matthew, big warm welcome back. Good to see you again. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the green. Stocks higher is another report pointing to labor market slowdown, bolstered speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates this year. Here's where we stand. S&P up 10 right now, a gain of 0.2%. Dow Industrials up 163, higher by 0.4%, while NASDAQ higher by 11, up by 0.1%, with the S&P, by the way, right around 5,200, 51.98 right now. 10-year, 4.48%, the 2-year, 4.81%. We've got spot gold today up $21 the ounce, up 0.9%, 23.30, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.1%, 79.05 a barrel on WTI. Wall Street is looking ahead to next week's CPI report. This has been a very light week for economic data. David Leibovitz is global market strategist at J.P. Morgan Investment Management.
I actually think that it's not the worst thing in the world. We have a somewhat quiet week. The market can digest what it learned last week. I mean, we got a lot of data last week in the U.S., around the world. The market can process that, and the market can listen to what Fed speakers have been saying, right? We're seeing, relative balance between those that are continuing to talk about easing later on this year and those that may be a little bit more hawkish.
David Leibovitz of J.P. Morgan. Airbnb shares sliding the most in a year after the home rental company gave a lackluster outlook for the second straight quarter. Airbnb down 6.6%. Also after earnings, ARM Holdings tumbling after the chip designer delivered a lukewarm revenue forecast for the fiscal year. ARM Holdings down now by 3.4%. So again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 11, a gain of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues now. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Hey, Charlie, thank you. Great to see you, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. It's Little Friday, and we have a lot to talk about. Yes, I am Joe Matthew, back with you, and I did miss you. Thanks for being with us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Go to YouTube, search Bloomberg Global News. You'll find our live stream, and we invite you into the studio here as we try to get a sense of next steps in Israel, whether a ceasefire is actually at hand, whether a ground invasion of Rafah, a true invasion, is actually at hand as well, with President Biden making news, remembering the red line that he invoked. Echoes of Barack Obama in Syria said the invasion of Rafah would be it. And now that we're seeing the initial stages of such an invasion, or what appear to be at least, the president making news on CNN after the withdrawal, we knew this already, the withholding, I should say, of a shipment that included nearly 2,000-pound bombs. The president saying that he will continue to withhold shipments of offensive weaponry. Listen to how he put it on CNN.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks. But I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet, they're not going to get our support if, in fact, they go in these population centers.
Population centers like Rafah. As we bring Jordan Fabian into the conversation now, Bloomberg White House correspondent, with whom we have spoken quite a bit about the tensions involved here and the domestic pressure that the president is facing from his left. Jordan, it's good to see you. These shipments, to be clear, before we talk about the politics involved, are separate from the supplemental request that was just passed in the House?
Yeah, this is all very complicated, but we're actually talking about one shipment of heavy bombs that's been put on pause. It hasn't been canceled. Now they're looking at some other weapon system that's been under review for a long time that would essentially allow Israel to make some of their dumb bombs into smart bombs, like some guided munitions. But none of this has to do with the supplemental. And administration officials have made it clear, and we heard President Biden say it, they're going to continue to supply Iron Dome. They're going to continue to supply, tanks, armor, ammunition, like some very important other things. And so you view this more as a warning shot rather than the final decision.
Sure. Now, this is part of an existing agreement, right, in which we are sending military aid to Israel. You mentioned that there could be another, and that's kind of where the president was making news here. It's not only these 500 and 2,000-pound bombs, but to your point, the direct attack munitions that would smarten up dumb bombs. Are we on a kind of retainer, essentially, with Israel, where we're providing weapons on the regular, and this just happens to bump into a political problem?
Absolutely. I mean, the U.S. has long been the biggest defense supplier for Israel. I mean, this has been the case for decades. And so that's why this pause got so much attention, that this relationship could possibly be disrupted because of this tension between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu and their differences over war plans for Rafah.
Well, it's interesting. It's important that we clear that up, and I appreciate that, because the reaction that we're hearing from the Speaker of the House and from some of his rank and file would make you think that the president was rescinding the supplemental budget or spending plan that is now law. It will not interrupt the flow of defensive weaponry. But Joe Biden's got some pretty difficult decisions to make here. So does Benjamin Netanyahu. Are we looking at a breakdown in our relationship potentially over Rafah?
It certainly moved closer to that, at least for the Biden-Netanyahu relationship. It's been strained for a long time over this war. And, going back to the Obama administration when Netanyahu was such an outspoken critic of the Iran nuclear deal. Right. And so this has been years in the making, and now we're at this breaking point. And so you have, this is part of the reason why Biden is pushing so hard for a ceasefire deal. He doesn't want it to get to that point. He's been studiously trying to avoid a breakdown. He doesn't want that to happen. It would cost him a lot domestically. It would dramatically alter U.S. foreign policy. And so he's been trying to talk them off the ledge here. And the question is whether they can get to some sort of deal that averts a full-scale invasion of Rafah.
Well, let's talk about that before we get into the military side of this with Kelly Grieco. It's not lost on us that William Burns, the CIA director, has made his way to Israel. We know that there are parties to negotiate in Cairo. Where does this stand right now? Because we were told that this had fallen apart.
Yeah, it's all a bit of a mystery. There's still talks ongoing. John Kirby, the White House spokesperson, actually just said that CIA Director Burns, who's been deeply involved in those talks, is actually leaving Cairo. He said that was a previously scheduled departure and that this is not a sign that the talks are breaking down. Yeah. But obviously, without the presence of a senior U.S. official there, it doesn't necessarily suggest there's an imminent deal on the table here. So we're still in a bit of a holding pattern. There's been a lot of fog of war surrounding these talks, and we're all trying to decipher what direction this is going to go in.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago we were told it could be any hour, and the time is ticking here. Thanks for the insights, helping us delineate between these two different spending plans. Jordan Fabian, great to see you, Bloomberg White House correspondent, as we try to keep you honest here on where the money is coming from and where it's going, and more specifically about what Israel needs right now. Would the U.S. have withheld, even if it was on the promise of later delivery, these 2,000-pound bombs, if we believe that Israel needed them? Our first question for Kelly Grieco, Stimson Center Senior Fellow with the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program. Kelly's been very helpful with helping us understand the strategy and the hardware on the ground here, and it's good to have you back on Bloomberg. Kelly, can you answer that question? If we believed Israel needed this weaponry right now for its own security, would we not have delivered it?
I think that's a good question. I think the evidence suggests that if we thought it was needed for their security, we would have delivered it, given that we are continuing to provide them other defensive systems, including things for air defense. But these are really more about whether Israel's going to conduct a major offensive operation into Rafah. And we have real concerns about that.
Well, give us a sense of what these weapons would be used for. And we're talking about two different shipments, to be fair, Kelly. There were 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and 1,700 500-pound bombs that the president decided to withhold. I realize there's another potential shipment here involving joint direct attack munitions. We can talk about those. But what do these heavy bombs actually do beyond flattening buildings and neighborhoods? What would they be needed for?
Yes, so this is a very large bomb. It's one of the largest in the U.S. arsenal. And in particular, this kind of munition is something that could be used, for example, to try to destroy tunnels. We know Hamas, of course, has a lot of tunnels throughout the Gaza Strip. And so this is really the kind of munition you would use to try to collapse those tunnels by launching a bomb, if you know the location, and trying to destroy it, because it creates a very large crater, about 16 feet by 50 feet on average.
Wow. It's interesting because the IDF is known for precision, Kelly, and I wonder to what extent precision is possible. You certainly get a different answer when you talk to Israeli officials about this, whether it's possible to be precise as Hamas gathers itself, intertwines itself with civilian populations.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a fair question to ask. I think one of the realities is that in Gaza, it's very densely packed with people. And so in that kind of environment, and particularly Rafah, where a lot of, 1.5 million people are now concentrated, no matter how precise you try to be, you're going to probably have significant collateral damage. But I think one of the things that the administration has highlighted is that, particularly with these kinds of bombs, that they would like to see that the IDF moves towards using something that is more precise, that maybe doesn't have the same kind of blast radius as these kind of larger weapons.
As we spend time with Kelly Grieco, I have to ask Kelly about the Arms Export Control Act, because at the beginning of this whole process, when there were first questions about conditions being tied to weapons, and this may have come up with Ukraine as well, we were told by lawmakers that there are already conditions in any agreement under which the U.S. is sending weapons to a foreign ally. Is this pause legal, knowing the way the Arms Export Control Act works, and aren't those conditions already in place?
Yes, I mean, I think my sense is that this is legal. This is not unprecedented either, particularly within the U.S.-Israel relationship. Ronald Reagan in 1982 actually imposed a 6-year ban on cluster munitions being provided to Israel after there was evidence suggesting that they had used cluster munitions in their invasion of Lebanon in areas where there were civilians. So there is precedent for this. I mean, part of the reason that we, provide weapons to allies and partners is because we have shared interests, but it's also because it provides some leverage. And so this is really a choice by the administration to use that leverage at this moment.
Interesting. Do you think that leverage results in any different course of action by the IDF? We understand operations have been limited to areas near Rafah's border with Egypt. What do you think we're about to see?
Yeah, this is challenging. Right now we have a 3-way game of chicken going on, with Israel sort of using the threat of the Rafah operation to try to get Hamas to agree to this, temporary ceasefire that it would like, not a permanent one that Hamas wants. And we are now playing a game of chicken with the Israelis about not conducting a massive operation in Gaza. We do know that Israel, according to anonymous administration officials, had sufficient munitions to conduct that operation. So the real cost would be long term if this would cause a major breach in the relationship, and that we won't know until I think the Israeli cabinet really makes that decision.
It's really fascinating as you referred to Ronald Reagan, Kelly, and I wonder if Joe Biden might invoke that name in his own rationale here. The next shipment, by the way, that which is being reviewed by the administration, we're told, 6,500 joint direct attack munitions would convert free-fall dumb bombs into precision-guided weapons. It would make the dumb bomb smart. Doesn't that actually save potentially civilian lives?
Well, in this situation, it's less helpful than it might be in other contexts, because even though, it helps them to target in on with this kit, helps the dumb bomb basically to go towards a target, a very specific target, and to navigate there.
Yep.
But because you're in this very concentrated, dense civilian population, it doesn't really make that much of a difference in this urban environment.
Got it. Kelly Grieco specializes in asymmetric warfare and the type of weaponry that we're talking about going into Israel. Can you give me a sense more specifically, Kelly, about the way Israel is going to manage Rafah here? It looks like they're trying to start at least around the edges, as we just discussed, along the border with Egypt. But if they want to actually extricate Hamas, how long could this take?
I think the answer to that is that if the goal is still really to defeat Hamas, destroy Hamas, I mean, we're talking years. All of the evidence is so far that they have not been very successful with that. It's, as we've learned over 20 years, it's very hard to destroy a terrorist organization. So the reality is that I think Israel really needs to think about what their goal is moving forward. And thinking about how to best achieve that, and maybe scaling back the objective from destroying a terrorist organization, because that's just so exceedingly difficult.
Yeah. Last time you were with us, Kelly, we were asking you about the temporary pier that the U.S. military has been building to bring aid into Gaza, and to the extent that it may become a target. How are you feeling about it now?
Yeah, I remain concerned about it in terms of it being targeted. The pier has been completed, but because of weather conditions, they haven't been able to move it into place. And certainly, there's a great need for the pier and to help with humanitarian relief. But again, it remains, a target. Certainly the pier itself and, U.S. personnel that are operating nearby.
Kelly, it's great to have you back, as always. Kelly Grieco with us from the Stimson Center, and a fascinating look inside. The rationale here by the administration, what could be a turning point, to Kelly's point, in our relationship, if continued shipments are withheld. We're going to have to feel this out together, and we'll have a lot more reporting for you on that over the course of the next hour. In fact, we'll be talking with a member of Congress about this, Congressman Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, joining us in hour 2 with a lot of concern by Republicans following this shift by the Biden administration. Carmel Arbit of the Atlantic Council will also join us next hour. But we want to deal with the aftermath of the MTV. From MTG, the motion to vacate. Mike Johnson still speaker. We'll talk to Mike Dorning about it next on Bloomberg.
Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the S&P holding right around 5,200, 5,201 right now. It is up by 14 points, up 0.3%. Stocks are gaining on this Thursday after another report pointing to labor market slowdowns, bolstered speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates this year. S&P 5,203 right now, up 0.3%. Dow Industrial is up 163 points, up 0.4, while NASDAQ is up 30. That is an advance of 0.2%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.48%, 2-year 4.81%. Spot gold now up $22 the ounce to $23.31, up by 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.5%. WTI 79.41 a barrel. Gaming giant Roblox shares are plunging after the company reported a bookings forecast that fell short of analyst estimates for the second quarter. Roblox now down by 21%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P up 14, up 0.3%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. It's good to see you, and thanks for joining us here as Mike Johnson survives his attempt at ouster. I thought I'd leave for a couple of days, let them work this out. Sure enough, by God, Kaylee Lyons handled the whole thing for us live last night. What took 15 rounds, and I can't remember how many weeks to get this around with Kevin McCarthy. They just put this down in less than an hour last evening. It all happened within the bounds of Balance of Power. Marjorie Taylor Greene, now further isolating herself, arguably, from her own Republican conference. The question is, how many times can Speaker Johnson survive one of these now that we've gone through this? Will the Democrats be with him again? As Democratic lawmakers did save this Republican speaker, I think we can agree, from being fired. With me now at the table is a man who's been watching this with us for weeks, Mike Dorning, of course, reporting on politics and editing for Bloomberg. It's great to see you, Mike. The other Mike Johnson is still speaker today. 196 House Republicans voted to table the motion, 163 Democrats. So there were 11 Republicans out there who thought it was a good idea to fire the boss. What happens to them now?
Well, if it weren't for Superman Hakeem Jeffries coming to Mike Johnson's rescue and the other Democrats with him, 11 Republicans is enough to topple you. So this exposes a real weakness in the Speaker of the House at the moment. And, Hakeem Jeffries was asked last night, will you come in and rescue him again if there's another revolt? And he said, I haven't given it any thought, which means, the...
We do this again next week.
Well, yeah, and also, it means that the kind of thank you for your help on Ukraine rescue card may be valid for only one use. Well, we don't know. And that's probably exactly how Jeffries wants to leave it.
Sure.
Because he's not going to commit himself, because he has his own caucus to worry about. And he, A, doesn't want to do something to further damage Johnson, but B, doesn't want to do something to give him a freebie bailout.
So going back to the conversation we were having here a couple of weeks ago, we don't really have a coalition government, and we're being reminded of that now. Everyone's going to go back in their own corners. And of course, as that happens, we're all looking now at Donald Trump, out with a statement on Truth Social that left the door open to more potential trouble here. Quote, with a majority of one shortly growing to 3 or 4, he writes, we're not in a position of voting on a motion to vacate. At some point, we may very well be. But this is not the time, unquote.
That really surprised me. I certainly, it's one thing to hold that view, but it's another thing to signal that view right at that moment, because if you're running for president normally, and especially at this point in the calendar, what you're trying to do is unify your party behind you and cut out the sniping back and forth. And that presumably is why Trump came in. He came in after the battle was over, had rescued him after Hakeem had already.
You're not off the hook.
But Trump had been signaling before that he didn't want them to oust Johnson. But you would think normally a presidential candidate in this phase of a campaign would be trying to just keep this all tamped down until November and then settle it after the election. But he's openly saying it's the wrong time to depose the speaker. We need to unify right now, but who knows, maybe later we'll change our minds.
Fascinating. So this is over, but not really over for Mike Johnson. Then again, as we were discussing, while 11 here is more than Johnson expected, the conference doesn't seem to have the stomach to go through this again. So maybe he lives his way through
yeah,
the
if I
rest
had
of
to
this
bet
Congress.
on it, I would bet that he would live through November. But I wouldn't, there's still a real chance. We're not talking about a low risk. We're talking about a substantial risk.
Isn't that something?
That this could still go asunder for him.
And Mike Dorning is pretty careful when he uses his language typically, so that means something to us. I was flying last weekend for the first time in a minute, got on an airplane, and I ended up being grounded for an hour because a light bulb went out on the plane, and they didn't have another light bulb, and all this FAA paperwork had to happen to give us, we're just sitting there waiting for paperwork. Then you land somewhere, and the gate is not ready, so you sit on the tarmac again. Is any of this going to get better when they pass this FAA reauthorization, or this is just my own lot in life, and it's...
I think it's your own lot in life, and it has to do with how many
wheels falling off airplanes. We're told that all these the runway, the near misses at the airport. Will this legislation get to any of this?
The legislation will not get to much of that. It will finance projects to improve airspace. I mean, not airspace, the airports and landing facilities and air traffic stuff. That all sort of moves along. This legislation lets them levy taxes on your airline ticket to pay for that. If the legislation lapsed, those taxes and that funding to improve airports would temporarily lapse, although they seem certain to at least temporarily extend it if they can't agree.
Yeah.
But those sorts of problems aren't going to be cured mostly by this, at least not in the short term.
So the House cleared an extension, a short-term extension, and then bailed on left town yesterday.
So yeah, the Senate has a choose option A or choose option B.
So can Chuck Schumer get unanimous consent and push this through?
My understanding is they were working on that, but once you have the option that the House has already passed to kick it a week, do you really want to make that
Spend
final?
the weekend here arguing?
Well, also, if you're holding out and trying to get a compromise and you want your side to win and you know you could really just wait another week, do you really want to make the hard choice and give up now? Why not hold out a week? That's always the dynamic in legislation. If everyone already agreed, then it wouldn't be a problem. The only way you agree is by people making hard choices to give up something they really want. And when you have an out to wait a week...
well, they want amendments, right? They're going to block this unless there's an agreement to hear about their amendments in the Senate next week. Is that fair?
Yeah, but that's always a game that's played in the Senate, and then sometimes they get something, sometimes they don't.
Right.
They resolve it at the last minute when they're up against the deadline.
Well, we've got another cloture vote that's looming here. Mike Dorning, after this, are we done? Is there anything left on the agenda that Farm Bill, I guess, we'll spend some time on?
The Farm Bill we'll spend some time on. It's not clear to me that they can actually all get together on that. They might get together on that. And when we say Farm Bill, yes, that's what gives all the farm subsidies to American farmers, but it's also the rules for food assistance.
You mean food stamps?
For like more than 40 million people in America. Right. So
that's the SNAP program that you hear people refer to.
Yeah, nowadays the technical name is SNAP, but sort of most of us know it as food stamps. It's food aid.
When's the last time they actually had food stamps?
Oh my God!
I remember that when I was a kid. I don't think that
years ago.
It's been a long time.
And even now, they're not really like the old sort of.
No, that's the point.
Stamps that people used to use at the grocery store. They get a credit card, essentially.
That's correct. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about, though. Unless there's an emergency funding request, something happens around the world that we're not thinking about, maybe disaster relief, we can pretty much map out the rest of this Congress.
Yeah, the only other thing that really for the Farm Bill, they need to do an extension if they can't agree by the end of September, and they will extend it if they can't agree. They're not going to let all of this stuff lapse. And again, technically they have to keep the government open after September 30th when the funding runs out. who knows with this Congress, but normally if you can't agree, then they just extend it till after the election and then do something.
And then everyone this summer goes away to campaign is the
They
plan,
want to
right?
spend more time campaigning usually, and the majority party in each chamber is usually worried about keeping their incumbents elected, so they try to make sure there's campaign time.
Yeah, get them home, get them funded. And that's when things get real quiet around here in Washington. Of course, we're going to have a lot of other things happening with the presidential campaign.
Lightning over the presidential campaign.
That's right, and we'll all be running around the campaign trail. Great to have you back. Amazing. We actually saw it happen. Another motion to vacate triggered on the House floor. In this case, it didn't work so well. He covers Congress for us and edits political coverage here at Bloomberg. Mike Dorning, we thank you, as always, Mike, for joining. The panel is up next. Rick and Jeannie are with us here on the Thursday edition. I've missed them both, and we have a lot to talk about. Our signature panel is on the way after we get up to date on world and national news. And for that, we turn to Amy Morris, of course, in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Welcome back. Adult film actress Stormy Daniels is back on the witness stand in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. Today's testimony will test both Daniels and Trump's ability to keep their cool. Daniels on Tuesday was defensive and abrasive during a harsh cross-examination in which Trump's lawyer repeatedly accused her of lying about an affair with the former president. But Trump's demeanor, which included swearing during Daniels' testimony, drew a warning from the judge. President Biden is warning that he will stop additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if the country goes ahead with a ground invasion of Rafah in Gaza. In an interview with CNN, Biden highlighted the potential loss of civilian life if Israel invades Rafah.
They go into Rafah. I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to publicly respond, but Israeli officials have made their displeasure clear. The Senate is in a stalemate over how to move forward on the reauthorization of the FAA. Lobbyists are fighting against two amendments to the must-pass bill. One is a coalition wants more flights added to Reagan National Airport in Washington, a rival coalition working to kill that amendment, and the Washington Post says that the travel industry is working to block an amendment that would regulate the facial recognition technology used by TSA. Now, the deadline to renew the FAA reauthorization is, yes, tomorrow night, but the House yesterday did pass a one-week extension that gives the Senate a little more time. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We got the S&P holding at 5203 right now, up 16 points. That is a gain of 0.3%. Stocks rose as another report pointing to labor market slowdowns bolstered speculation that the Fed will be able to cut rates this year. The Dow up 186, up 0.5%. The S&P again up 0.3. We've got the NASDAQ Composite Index up 33 points, up by about 0.2%. It is a broad-based rally today with the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares up now by about 0.5%. 10-year 4.48% with a 2-year 4.82%. Spot gold is gaining $23 the ounce, 23.32. That is a gain of 1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude 79.26 a barrel. WTI up by about 0.3%. On labor, jobless claims are up. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Weekly jobless claims are the highest since last August, 231,000. There have been major job cut announcements of late, including EV maker Tesla. There's a seasonal quirk, too, spring break in New York City, when public school bus drivers and other school workers are allowed to file claims. Job openings, meantime, are off their peaks, too, a sign Americans could rely on government aid for longer. The labor market, though, has largely outperformed Wall Street expectations over the past year. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Earnings news on an update for the rest of the market. ARM Holding shares are down now by 3.9%. They are tumbling after the chip designer gave a lukewarm revenue forecast for the fiscal year. Also trading lower today, Airbnb, that stock now down by 6.8%, sliding the most in a year after the home rental company gave lackluster guidance for a second straight quarter. So again, recapping, S&P above 5,200, 5203 right now. That is an advance of 0.3%. Balance of Power, the Thursday edition, continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, good to see you, and welcome back to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Speaker Mike Johnson, fresh off the vote that saw him survive his attempted ouster with the help of Democrats, thinks Joe Biden is having a senior moment when it comes to Israel. We just spent a lot of time at the beginning of the broadcast talking about these weapons that have been withheld, paused is the word some are using, or delayed in shipment to Israel because of what appears to be the imminent invasion of Rafah. The president holding an interview on CNN last evening in which he made clear that additional weapons would be withheld if the invasion took place. Mike Johnson would like to know what happened. Quote, I went straight to the White House. I said, somebody's got to have to explain this to me because it's very different than what I was told. I'll just interrupt myself here and remind you of the conversation we had earlier this hour with Jordan Fabian. This was not part of the supplemental package that was just passed by Congress and signed by the president. Those were defensive missiles to replenish the Iron Dome, defensive weapon systems for the most part, along with some other things. Mike Johnson goes on to say, they said this has nothing to do with the supplemental package that you all passed. So this statement by the president tonight, I believe he's off script. I don't think that's something that staff told him to say, unquote. We've seen many rank-and-file Republicans criticize the president in interviews and in written statements since this happened. We'll talk with one Republican member next hour in Brian style. But I'd love to know what the panel thinks about this. Some think it's an about-face. Some think it's consistent with what the president has been saying about the war in Gaza. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors, make up our signature panel, and it's great to see both of you here. Jeannie, is this more in line with what progressive Democrats want to hear from Joe Biden? Is this a new message, or has he been consistent about the killing of civilians in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing he's going to say that is going to appease the left, and certainly not this. And that's one of the really difficult positions he finds himself in. I mean, I was struck by a Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, and the protests that were going on, and both sides were screaming F Joe Biden. I mean, that's the position he is in. So no, this is not going to appease them. I do think it is consistent with the red line he has been trying to draw. In terms of going into Rafah, it's, very little impact on the ground at this point. We know that because the Israeli military has said that. They've been downplaying this. They have what they need to go in Rafah, but it is the president sending a message to Netanyahu in the war cabinet saying, I said, don't do this. And he is keeping with that. But politically, this is a loser for Joe Biden, and it will be, but he's president, so he's got to make these tough decisions.
So now he's upsetting people on both sides, right? Rick, progressives were already angry. They were already protesting the policy in Israel. Now he's making Israel hawks angry, including Republicans. In the case of the speaker, confusing the supplemental with the stuff that's been withdrawn here, is the president making life more difficult politically here domestically?
Yeah, I think politically, for sure. I think in politics, the one clear message you always try to give to campaigns is focus on your friends. Your enemies are never going to really vote for you, right? I mean, the idea that if someone dislikes Joe Biden, that somehow he's going to change their mind and they're going to vote for him is a high-risk political strategy. And so I think this falls into the classic, I came to the dance with Israel and I'm leaving the dance with Israel. And I just don't understand the political. I'm not speaking to the geopolitical nature of this, just the domestic U.S. politics of saying, I'm going to be a stalwart supporter of Israel, which is how he started this entire process. And now to be doing backflips, being tied up like a pretzel by the left of his party, I think he's going to come out of this with no friends. And that is a bad political strategy.
Well, he did say, Rick, we are going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome, referring to the supplemental, and their ability to respond to attacks, remembering the extent to which the U.S. cooperated with Israel and the U.K. and others to fend off the attacks from Iran. Rick, are we going to be in a situation with Israel that feels more like Ukraine, where we're providing defensive but not offensive weapons?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a conundrum for Biden because that's the easy out. Sure, we'll let Israel defend itself, but we're not doing anything to help them with the existential threat they have on their border from Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. I mean, so the idea that this administration is telling Israel, hunker down, guys, for the rest of your existence, it's okay to have these terrorist organizations trying to attack you every day, morning, noon, and night, and you can do nothing offensively to cure that problem, but we'll give you as many missiles as it takes to keep their bombs from killing Israelis. It makes absolutely no strategic sense whatsoever, and that has not been the historic policy of the United States. And so I'm attributing this, similar to what some of our Republican friends are doing, is saying, it's kind of like saying that there's no such thing as strategic ambiguity in Taiwan. In this case, the White House has at least figured out not to constantly correct their own president, but we hope that this is not a policy.
Well, the speaker calls it a senior moment, Jeannie. What Joe Biden did say to CNN, quote, we're not walking away from Israel's security. We're walking away from Israel's ability to wage war in those areas, referring to these dense population centers like Rafah. Is it possible for him to walk this line, or is Rick right?
It is possible for him to walk this line, and I think we have to be clear. It is one thing to talk about the impact on U.S. politics. He's not going to appease anybody, as I was saying earlier, with this strategy. But in terms of foreign policy, absolutely. We have seen this time and time again. Republican presidents have made this case. Go back to Ronald Reagan. The reality is that no nation, and the U.S. included, gives aid to another country that has absolutely no strings attached and is in violation of our values and what is we define as our interest. Now, I understand that people can see his policy is not in our interest, but from Joe Biden's perspective, this is what he is dealing with. And, you just look at what Cindy McCain was saying over the weekend, Northern Gaza in a full-blown crisis in terms of the food. They just do not have access. 35,000 people dead. 2/3 of those women and children. So, Joe Biden absolutely can make the case, just like he has with Ukraine. And by the way, wasn't it Republicans who were saying on Ukraine, we need to have oversight, there can't be a blank check? And I don't think we can describe this as walking away from Israel. $14 billion went to Israel last month. He is committed to that, and he can and will. So domestically, it's not a political winner for him, certainly. But from a foreign policy perspective, there is a different question when you're talking about what is in the United States' best interest. And I would also add this. I'm sorry, Joe, I know I'm going long. What is the end game for Israel here? Many people think this is not in Israel's best interest, because the idea that you're going to wipe out Hamas, as you just had that great conversation with Kelly, very, very tough to do, almost never done. And so if that's the end game, that doesn't suit either the U.S. or Israel.
Well, you're bringing up the issue of humanitarian aid, which is awfully important. It's something that we were lucky to talk with Cindy McCain about at the World Food Program. We're hearing from the World Health Organization today, Rick, and the situation is dire. They're talking about famine, and the statement from the WHO, without more aid flowing into Gaza, we cannot sustain our life-saving support to hospitals. They're running out of gas. To what extent can the U.S. affect this now that we've got this bridge up? And does that have a political effect on the ground in Israel and Gaza?
Well, just to be totally clear, Cindy McCain is not blaming the Israelis for the lack of support going in. They have been supportive and opened up the gates. When her trucks go into Gaza full of food, they are kidnapped and held hostage by Hamas, and if not outright robbed, to where they take hundreds of trucks a day, re-steer the food to their purposes. At that point, the World Food Program and other aid agencies don't have a clue where Hamas is taking it, and then they mysteriously return the trucks so that they can get another raid on those same. So one of the things we have to really understand, I completely disagree with whether or not a democracy like Israel in and amongst a bunch of terrorist organizations is in the U.S. national interest. It is, and we've never micromanaged their security situation. We've always been supportive, which is why we don't have conditions on aid. We should not be telling the Israelis how to fight their fights. The bottom line is that when you do ship food into Israel, or in this case, gasoline, let's say, Hamas interdicts that, and they use it in order to fight the Israelis. And so unless you level set what is actually happening on the ground there, you're really never going to solve any of these problems until at which point in time the war ends. And that's when you have basically got either a surrender or the extinction of Hamas. Those are the terms under which we are all operating. Israel now has control of the Rafah Gate. That's the first time we don't have Hamas in charge of determining what food comes in and out of the Rafah Gate. That is a very big positive. The U.S. has now built the pier that'll soon be operational, and that will be the first time that we have the coast that is open, controlled by Hamas. And so I think that, yes, there are enormous problems associated with this, but we have to really understand who the problem maker is. And the problem maker to getting food and gasoline to the people of Palestine is Hamas. It's very limited control that Israel has, to the point of which they are the ones being able to support the humanitarian needs. So I just want to level set that, because I think we're hearing a lot of disinformation. And
I hear you.
Other than Jeannie, I would have blamed it on the Chinese.
Well, I want to make sure everyone has a chance to make their points here. Jeannie Shanzano, Rick Davis will be back with us in our second hour, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors on what is not an easy topic. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We've also got an eye on the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, and I would love to spend a couple of moments with June Grasso, of course, the host of Bloomberg Law, as we saw Stormy Daniels back on the stand today for cross-examination. June, it's great to see you. I wonder if this session, to see the former president and a porn star together again in this courtroom, did anything to advance the case on either side?
Well, really, everyone's talking about Stormy Daniels' testimony and the cross-examination, which was going into details about inconsistencies what Donald Trump was wearing, whether they actually ate at dinner. But remember, what the jury has to believe here is that Stormy Daniels had this story to tell, this salacious story, and that Donald Trump would want to keep it secret before the election, and that she got paid. I mean, they don't actually have to believe the little details. But the problem is that all the defense needs, the problem for the prosecution is that all the defense needs is one person saying, oh, there were some inconsistencies in what she said about what he wore last time she talked and this time. So it's hard to judge a jury, but I think they spent a lot more time on her than they should have in this case.
Prosecutors have been trying to get their arms around the idea of fear as a motivator here, and the extent to which Stormy Daniels may or may not have been intimidated. They're showing this Trump social media post, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." Stormy Daniels said she thought Donald Trump was talking to her. Does the jury care?
Well, this again, I think, goes to her story, because her story is that she didn't so much want the money, which is hard to believe, but she didn't want the money so much as she wanted to be kept safe. And so by making this deal, follow me here, by making this deal and agreeing to keep it secret, she would be kept safe and her daughter would be kept safe. So that's the sort of torturous kind of route that she's taken to her testimony, and that's why they're going into all this detail about whether she was afraid or not.
Find out what happened on Bloomberg Law, 6 p.m. New York time, right here with June Grasso on Bloomberg Radio. June, it's great to see you. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The Biden administration says it may withhold more weapons from Israel. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, as the president promises to delay additional shipments if Israel pursues a ground invasion of Rafah. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Kaylee, it's great to see you as we wait for word on a potential ceasefire that would change this story in a big way.
Well, sure, because if there is a ceasefire, that would probably put off, at least for some period of time, a actual larger incursion of the Israeli army into Rafah. In the meantime, though, the warnings that we have gotten repeatedly from President Biden and this administration only growing louder. We have long known they did not want Israel to conduct a major operation in Rafah.
Sure.
Now there's a little bit more punch behind those words, perhaps.
Yeah, and there were questions about whether Israel was in fact planning a real ground invasion as opposed to some more limited strikes here. But the message was clearly delivered in a CNN interview. Kaylee, the president went out of his way to make this clear that more weapons would be withheld, that he's not happy about what's happening in Gaza. And the blowback from Republicans has been something. The Speaker of the House says the president had a senior moment.
Indeed, he feels that he is violating the terms of an agreement that was reached between the House, the Senate, and the White House in terms of advancing supplemental funding. It is worth pointing out the weapons that have been withheld, not actually related to the supplemental. The supplemental was all about defensive weapons, replenishing the Iron Dome, and the like. What we're talking about here is a shipment of large-scale bombs that the U.S. was concerned might be used on a population in Rafah. So we're going to have much more on that, and you'll hear from President Biden himself in just a moment. But first, we got to hear from Charlie Pellet, get a check on what's happening in these markets up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And good day from New York. We've got the S&P 500 index right now above 5,200. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg Television and Radio to find out where we close today, because now the S&P is at 5,207, just about the best level of the day. We're up by 18 points now, up 0.4%. The Dow up 215, up 0.5. We've got NASDAQ up 43, a gain there of 0.3%. 10-year, 4.47%, with that 2-year now yielding 4.81%. Spot gold up $21 the ounce to $23.30 for the precious metal, a gain right now of 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude 79.10 a barrel, right now up by about 0.1%. Earnings news, Airbnb now down by more than $10 a share, down 6.7%. Airbnb sliding the most in a year after the home rental company gave lackluster guidance for a second straight quarter, indicating that growth in travel spending will slow ahead of the peak summer season. So again, recapping, a lot of green on the screen right now, with the S&P above 5,200, 5,207, up now by 0.4%. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York. Thank you. I am Kaylee, back with Joe here in Washington, where the entire town is abuzz about the interview that President Biden gave to CNN last night, specifically in regard to Israel and weapons that may or may not go to that U.S. ally, depending on its conduct in Rafah. Here was the President of the United States yesterday.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks. But I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet, they're not going to get our support if, in fact, they go into these population centers.
There you have it from the President of the United States speaking to CNN. It was that remark that the Speaker of the House called a senior moment, suggesting that the president was turning back on the agreement that had been made in the supplemental budget request, as Kaylee just mentioned. This is a separate shipment of weapons that, in fact, was not part of that spend. And we want to start the conversation there with Ian Marlowe, who joins us at the table today on Balance of Power, Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy. Ian, it's great to see you. This is clearly an important moment. Is the president engaging in diplomacy here in the public sphere? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this is clearly a policy directive from the White House saying enough is enough on Rafah. You know, the U.S. has been warning Israel about this sort of incursion for, weeks and weeks now. And we've seen over the past several months that Israel has been quite comfortable ignoring a lot of U.S. Efforts when it comes to humanitarian aid, or toning down the tenure of the war, protecting civilians and other things. Nothing has really made a difference. And out there was always the prospect that the U.S. could condition some military aid. And this is the most serious thing the U.S. has done. And they did specifically sell it as something about Rafah. These are big bombs. This shipment was, the shipment that was halted was, 2,000-pound bombs. They're saying, don't use that type of stuff in Rafah. They're still trying to influence that operation. But even though it's being sold as a specific sort of action, the U.S. has also said they're sort of reviewing other weapons shipments. And so to some degree, it's a bit of a muddied situation right now, because on the one hand, the U.S. is saying we're not conditioning all military aid to Israel. But on the other hand, they're saying, watch out, don't do what we've warned you about, because, there's other stuff on the table that we could take off.
Well, and Ian, I feel like we should just be clear about this, considering a lot of the rhetoric now that is surrounding this decision from the administration, including calls from some in Congress for President Biden to be impeached over this. Does the president have the authority to do this? And is there precedent for doing something like this historically when you look back at U.S. policy?
Yeah, I think over the decades, when there has been fierce fighting between Israel and in the Palestinian territories, previous administrations have temporarily halted specific weapons shipments in order to do exactly what they're doing now, which is to up the pressure a little bit. Because again, Israel is right there. Gaza and the West Bank are right there. There's a lot of pressure on Israeli officials on security matters, on national security matters, and the U.S. is far away, even though they're the major arms supplier. So I think, the rhetoric is hot right now. I think, from the Republicans, you're seeing something similar to what we saw in Ukraine, where there was a hesitancy in the administration to go with certain weapon platforms or certain policies, and then over time, eventually kind of came round, and we're seeing that now with this policy. They resisted for months, not wanting to condition military aid or halt military aid. That was always seemingly something this administration was never willing to do. And now they've done it and are getting criticized kind of from every flank. I think on the left, people are saying you should have done this earlier. Why is Rafah any different than other parts of Gaza that have been leveled by Israeli munitions, provided by the U.S. up until now? And on the right, obviously, people are saying, how are you trying to get a ceasefire deal with Hamas, while at the same time saying, oh, Israel, we're going to hold back weapons now.
Well, just another minute on that, if you would, Ian. This is happening while some are holding out hopes for a ceasefire to be announced. We know Bill Burns was back in Israel. What's going on, to the extent that you understand? Is it a serious conversation?
Yeah, to the extent that we understand it, I think those conversations are still happening, but that Bill Burns is sort of leaving the region. I think, look, it's.
Did we just miss our opportunity?
I think it's definitely. It doesn't seem like it's happening today, tomorrow. I think Israel thought that Hamas wasn't going to get to a yes on the ceasefire without additional military pressure, and that's what the beginning of the Rafah operation has all been about. But it's confusing for an outside observer to see exactly where the sort of U.S. red line is on this. We've always known that the U.S. has wanted Israel to do something more surgical, sort of a counter-terrorist operation as opposed to some huge invasion of Rafah. But in Israel, it's it seems inevitable that that's what they want to do, to go in some way, and it's unclear where the U.S. is going to draw the line on that. And right now we have this threat from Biden out there, but it's not clear exactly where. Maybe these conversations are happening in private, but it's not clear to us exactly what exactly would tilt Israel over the edge here, in the sense that, okay, this targeted, limited operation in Rafah has now tipped over into something totally unacceptable to the U.S., and they're going to cancel or halt other weapons platforms that they're thinking of sending. So that's a confusing thing at the moment. And hanging in the balance is this ceasefire, which again, it's if you push enough in Rafah, the Israelis think maybe you'll get a deal, and the U.S. thinks, okay, if you push too hard in Rafah, the deal's over. There's nothing left, right?
complicated to be sure. Ian Marlowe, Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy, thank you so much for joining us. And we want to get a little bit more perspective on these developments now. And joining us is Carmel Arbit of the Atlantic Council, where she is a senior fellow for Middle East programs and non-resident senior fellow. That is, Carmel, always great to have you here on Balance of Power. There are so many different things we could ask you in terms of the implications of this decision from the Biden administration. Surely there are political consequences domestically, geopolitical consequences potentially as well. What does this actually change in terms of not just the U.S.-Israel relationship, but also the way Israel is likely to conduct itself?
This is the highest friction point between Israel and the Biden administration that we have seen throughout the course of the war, but really in the entirety of the Biden administration. I think that the impact that it will have is still unclear, both in terms of whether or not this will be a temporary hold on weapons or whether or not the administration is going to turn around and release them. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that the domestic population and domestic voices in both countries, both the strong far right in Israel and the left in the U.S., are pulling these leaders apart. And that friction is really coming to the fore.
Carmel, I know you're not a weapons expert necessarily, but to the extent that we're looking at this messaging from the administration, withholding, for instance, these 2,000-pound bombs, what would they have been needed for? I guess another way of asking that is, would Joe Biden have withheld the shipment if they were, in fact, considered critical weaponry necessary for Israel to secure itself?
What the U.S. has done in its rhetoric is it has differentiated defensive munitions from offensive ones, where it's saying that it will continue to support Israel, Iron Dome, and other things that it uses to defend itself from Hamas. But in many cases, Israel is using this type of bombs and weaponry to go after Hamas's terrorist infrastructure. So they may be offensively going after that type of military equipment. And so from an Israeli perspective, there's no differentiation. From a U.S. perspective, there's a very clear differentiation in terms of how these are used. Now, of course, something like a 2,000-pound bomb has huge reverberating effects. It would be much less targeted in terms of what it takes out once dropped into a civilian center like Gaza, or in this case, Rafah, where there are more than 1 million people, of whom only about 80,000 have evacuated.
Well, it's important, Carmel, that you kind of make this distinction between defense and offense, because we have seen this before in this conflict, especially when Iran did that unprecedented strike attempting to get into Israeli territory with a barrage of drones and missiles. The U.S. did step up for Israel's defense, helping shoot those down, but made it very clear that if Israel were to retaliate in an offensive way, the U.S. wanted nothing to do with an offensive operation. Just on the subject, though, of Iran, what does this decision from the Biden administration likely mean for Iran or its proxies like Hamas? Does this embolden them in some way?
Yeah, Israel and its supporters have been very quick to point out that not only is this emboldening Hamas in the context of negotiations, where Israel has tried to use Rafah as a leveraging tool to push Hamas closer to Israel's ceasefire position, but it also sends a message to Hezbollah and to Iran that there is a wedge between the United States and Israel. And of course, U.S. support for Israel has been critical in Israel's ability to respond to any of those actors. So this could send a very troubling message to Iran that the U.S. is not necessarily behind Israel in these moments. Something to look for is that this week, the Biden administration was supposed to certify whether or not Israel had been in violation of international humanitarian law in its operation in Gaza as a condition put forward by the Senate to release additional arms. They missed the deadline for that certification. They've said it was not for political reasons. If for any reason the United States fails to offer that certification, we could see what is happening now become much more extreme.
Well, so let's just get to the bottom of this here, because we're hearing a lot of confusing rhetoric in Washington about the president's language, about his decision to withhold these shipments. The Speaker of the House went so far as to accuse him of having a senior moment, suggesting that he was somehow confused about the supplemental that had just passed Congress. Is this, Carmel, a shift in policy, or is this public diplomacy from the White House?
Look, it's too early to tell because what we're seeing right now is that the U.S. is delaying but hasn't totally stopped these shipments. And we're also seeing that they are reviewing and looking at what is going to happen in Rafah to determine whether or not they would hold back other artillery or other things like that. So it's a little bit early to say, but what you do hear and see is that there had been a sweeping bipartisan support for continued support to Israel from Congress, and the administration starting to take a step back. Whether or not it's going to just be rhetoric in this moment or will have real reverberating effects for the war yet to be seen.
Well, when we think about the war and its future, Carmel, as Joe and Ian were just discussing a moment ago, there were ongoing, still are, attempts to reach a ceasefire agreement, though the two sides want very different things. Hamas wants this to be permanent. Israel does not. Is that more or less likely now than it was yesterday?
I think as we see all the negotiating parties are departing in real time, we are certainly further away from a ceasefire agreement than we had been maybe even a couple of days ago. That being said, there will continue to be negotiations, and it will continue to be ultimately in the interest of both parties to pursue an end to this conflict. I think the real question is when. For Hamas, they're looking for an end to conflict now that won't require them to release the hostages and won't require them to cede power. For the Israelis, they're looking for the complete military destruction and removal from power of Hamas, and they still have not achieved it. And so whether or not they're able to come to a temporary ceasefire agreement or a permanent ceasefire agreement is going to be a question of timing.
I'm curious your thoughts in our remaining moment here on the role that William Burns may or may not be playing in this. From Cairo to Israel, did he speak with the Israelis about Rafah?
Yeah, so the Israelis have generally felt that Bill Burns has been a strong supporter and a critical partner in these negotiations. But Bill Burns, of course, is a part of this administration. And so it's very likely that the Biden administration has gotten fed up with the Israeli government and some of its internal politics. It also laid out a very clear red line about Rafah. Now, the Israelis still need to decide how pinpoint of an operation they're going to carry out in Rafah versus a much larger scale operation that they are being pressured to take on from their right. Bill Burns is playing an indispensable role in these negotiations, and I expect he will continue to.
Well, it's fascinating following his movements because it gives us a sense of when something is about to happen. Carmel Arbit of the Atlantic Council. Carmel, great to have you back with us. Your insights are important to us as well. The panel is next, only on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a headline right off the Bloomberg Professional Service. Apple going to be using its own chips in the cloud to power AI features in 2024. Apple shares right now, they're up by 0.7%. It is an up day on Wall Street. S&P topping 5,200. As data this morning showed a jump in jobless claims to the highest since August, beating estimates. S&P right now at 5204, up 16, close to the best levels of the day, up 0.3%. The Dow up 209, up 0.5. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 32, up 0.2. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of big tech names, up by 0.1%. 10-year 4.46% with a 2-year 4.81%. Spot gold up $23 the ounce. That is an advance right now of 1%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.3%, 79.24 a barrel, and Bitcoin now up by 0.6%, 61,940 on Bitcoin. Designer and marketer Tapestry has cut its revenue outlook for the remainder of the year after a sales decline in North America signaled weak demand from consumers in the U.S., its top market. Tapestry's brands, by the way, include Coach and Kate Spade. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P advancing now by 16 points, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew in Washington, where there's really one story, it seems, is dominating the entire conversation today, Joe, and that is after the U.S. decision to withhold, at least for now, pause a shipment of bombs to Israel over concern that they could be used in Rafah, a Gazan city in which more than 1 million Palestinians are taking refuge. And the administration does not want Israel to conduct a major ground operation there. President Biden last night saying there's more that we might pause if Israel does, as we do not want Israel to do.
It's actually interesting, too, because this particular shipment of weaponry would make dumb bombs smart, essentially. The attachments that you could put on these weapons that might make their destination more precise. Either way, this is the conversation we're having. And Kaylee, the Speaker of the House, thinks Joe Biden is having a senior moment. That was his reaction. Mike Johnson, after surviving an attempted ouster in the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson seemed to be implying, following all of this, that the president was turning or changing policy following the supplemental budget request that became law to send money to Israel and Ukraine. Mike Johnson, I believe he's off script. I don't think that's something that staff told him to say. We should note, Kaylee, that is a different source of funding and a completely different shipment of weapons. That which was in the supplemental will go to reinforce the Iron Dome and some of the other defensive systems. So there are questions right now about how this is going to play politically and whether the president is simply making both sides upset here in the U.S. We assemble our panel for their take on that. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors, coming, as I mentioned, after this day that Mike Johnson actually survived an attempt at his head. Rick, how do you look at this in terms of the movement from Joe Biden here? Was this, in fact, a change in policy, or is he simply leveraging the media, in this case, an interview on cable news, to try to affect the outcome in Gaza?
You know, Joe, it's a really good question. You never really know whether or not there's a change of policy, a gaffe, or just a musing on the part of Joe Biden when it relates to especially some of this very, very complex foreign policy arrangements. We've seen many times the White House walk back him saying there's no such thing as strategic ambiguity in Taiwan. We're going to defend them with our military. Not exactly the strategy that the U.S. has had for 50 years. And I think the same is true here. I think he is musing that he wants fewer casualties in Gaza, which I believe we all are for. And yet, for the first time, he's putting constraints on the weaponry that we send to Israel, which would be a change of policy. And one that nobody was expecting to hear, I don't think. I didn't get the impression that the administration had really laid out a case for that. Either to Israel or to American lawmakers who just agreed to spend this money on weapon systems without conditions attached to them. I mean, there are a lot of people who supported the supplemental for Joe Biden, Republicans in name, who were promised there would be no conditions on Israel. So I don't think it's explainable. I'm betting that it might have been just something he's thinking is appropriate rather than making it an actual determination by the administration. But then again, I could be wrong.
Well, we have heard from other officials in the administration, and including Matt Miller over at the State Department, a spokesperson who suggested that there are other weapon systems that they're looking at. The Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was testifying about this on Capitol Hill. So at least there is some degree of cohesion, it seems. But Jeannie, thinking about it politically, is this a no-win situation for President Biden? Because on the right, he obviously is getting a lot of criticism for this decision, questioning around whether his so-called ironclad support of Israel is in fact ironclad. On the left, he's waited a long time to do something like this, and for many, it probably is coming too late, as there's more than 30,000 Palestinians already dead in Gaza. So where's the win here?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kaylee. There is no win domestically, politically on this for Joe Biden. I mean, the best case scenario politically for Biden at home would be a ceasefire, obviously permanent rather than, temporary, but either way would be a improvement from where he is politically. But that said, the idea that this came out of whole cloth or that he misspoke, or certainly what the speaker said last night, is the reflection of somebody who hasn't been listening. The U.S. administration and Joe Biden have been shouting from the rooftops that there is a red line as far as Rafah is concerned. From the left, of course, they're not happy about that because they're saying, rightly so, what's so special about Rafah? Why didn't you draw the red line earlier? Be that as it may, they have said that. And what Lloyd Austin testified, to your point, in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee was the same thing. And Joe Biden repeated that last night. And in your conversation with Ian, you raised a great question. Is this unprecedented? And the answer is no. Ronald Reagan did it. George H.W. Bush did it. The United States presidents do it, Republicans and Democrats, when they are telling somebody in Israel or any country over and over again that this may not be in our interests or aligned with our values, and they are not getting a response. So from that perspective, it's neither unprecedented nor is it a reflection of Joe Biden speaking out of turn, but the reality of a shout to Benjamin Netanyahu to say he was serious when he said, don't go in full-fledged on Rafah at this point.
We're spending time with our panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature panel here on Balance of Power, together for the first time this week with a number of things to talk about. As we mentioned already, Mike Johnson having an interesting 24 hours here, Rick Davis, and I wonder if you see the last day being a win for him as well. He survived an attempted ouster, as everyone projected would happen, by Marjorie Taylor Greene. The motion to vacate, it actually happened yesterday. Ask Kaylee Lyons. She did the whole thing live. The question that I have now, though, is that after 11 Republicans came for his head, more than expected, should Mike Johnson feel safer now or more at risk than he did yesterday?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, because you would think the victory in and of itself, he saved his job, would be a victory. But you're right. I mean, 11 Republicans voted against his leadership, and that was more, I think, than anybody expected. And maybe they saw it as a free vote, and this way they could go back to their district and show how tough they are with the Republican leadership. Personally, I think it's a much smarter political gambit to show how tough you are with the minority leadership in the Democrat side. But that would just be a seasoned political professionals used to winning campaigns. And I have no idea what the strategy of Marjorie Taylor Greene is as far as electing more Republicans. Doesn't seem to be a good strategy. But yeah, I think if I'm the speaker, I would also be paying attention to the tweet or whatever social media post that Donald Trump posted up, which basically said, hey, congratulations, you got your job for now. And I'm not sure I would thinking, about changing the drapery in the speaker's office right now. I think it may be a temporary post.
Do you see this, Kaylee, the post from Donald Trump?
Yeah.
With a majority of one shortly growing to 3 or 4, we're not in a position of voting on a motion to vacate. At some point, we may very well be.
Yeah.
I thought that he was the reason why Mike Johnson didn't have to worry.
He's had some nice things to say about him. He has suggested that politically it wouldn't pay well for Republicans who are facing a vote in November to go through the kind of turmoil we saw last fall.
Right.
But I wonder if that more is a question of he's betting that the House majority is going to expand after the election rather than turn the Republicans back into a minority. But I'm not sure, Jeannie. How do you read the Trump truth?
Well, first of all, I'm so happy that Rick Davis has joined us in reading the truths. I love it. And, you know, it was a reflection of the reality of Donald Trump, which is that he said Marjorie, or I guess they're calling her Moscow Marge right now, but hold off. This isn't in my interest. And she didn't hold off. And so he said, okay, Marge, you went for it. It wasn't in my interest. I still love you. And maybe we'll do it in the future, which is why I keep asking, why doesn't Mike Johnson go forward and change this rule? He should have done it when they did the Ukraine bill. He didn't do it. I'm holding my breath that he does it so he could save his job. But the real winners here were Donald Trump, who still apparently controls the Republican caucus, and Hakeem Jeffries, who made the case for common sense governing in Washington, which is unusual.
Amazing. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, I don't even know what else to say. Thank you for a great conversation. Our signature panel here on Balance of Power, the Thursday edition. What could we be talking about tomorrow, Kaylee? It does make you wonder here. One thing we should note is our conversation coming up with a Republican member of the House, Brian Stile of Wisconsin, is going to join us, Kaylee, to talk about this and the way forward. What's left in the agenda? There aren't too many more after we get through this FAA reauthorization.
Yeah.
Talk about maybe the farm bill, and that's about it.
Yeah, everything else might have to wait until after the election. Speaking of things that took everybody by surprise yesterday, not just Marjorie Taylor Greene suddenly calling the motion to vacate, but the House deciding, forget what you're working on, Senate. We're punting the FAA. Right. 1 week extension. We're all getting out of town. You guys have fun.
Good move, I suppose.
So, 2-day work week.
Brian Stile's still here, though.
Nice.
I think he's joining us from Capitol Hill. So
yeah, so not everyone got out of town.
Stand by.
Fair point.
On that. All I know is I spent an hour on the tarmac waiting for a gate over the weekend, Kaylee, and I don't think that's going to be fixed by this bill.
Yeah, well, unless the senators from Virginia get their way on an amendment vote to make sure no more flights get added at Reagan.
We'll see about that.
Indeed, we will.
Let's get up to date on the news. Before we bring in the Congressman, Amy Morris joins us now in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington with world and national news. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial continues today. They're on a lunch break right now. The former president's lawyers cross-examined Stormy Daniels, argued that she was in it for the money when she took $130,000 to keep quiet about her claims that she had sex with Donald Trump. Now, Trump, on his way into the courtroom.
There's no case. Should have never been brought. Alvin Bragg didn't want to bring it. Cy Vance didn't want to bring it, and he didn't. He left. He didn't bring it.
Former President Donald Trump brought Florida Senator Rick Scott to watch today's proceedings. The Senate in a stalemate over how to move forward on the reauthorization of the FAA. Lobbyists are fighting against two amendments in the must-pass bill. One coalition wants more flights added to Reagan National Airport in Washington. And the Washington Post reports the travel industry is working to block an amendment that would regulate the facial recognition technology used by TSA. The House yesterday passed a 1-week extension, giving the Senate a little more time. And the faculty Senate at the University of Southern California voted to censure University President Carol Folt and Provost Andrew Guzman over a mishandling of events around commencement, centering around their choice to rescind the valedictorian speaking slot and canceling the main ceremony. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a developing story. T-Mobile and Verizon are in talks to carve up U.S. Cellular. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, right now, we got shares of U.S. Cellular surging by 15.9%. T-Mobile up 0.7%. Verizon up by 0.4%. Apple will deliver some of its upcoming AI features this year via data centers equipped with its own in-house processors. Apple shares up now by 1%. Stock market on track for its highest close in a month, with the S&P up 20, up 0.4. We've got the Dow up 259, up 0.7. NASDAQ up 44, up by 0.3%. 10-year 4.45%, with a 2-year 4.80%. Spot gold up 1%, 23.33 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.1%, 79.11 for a barrel of WTI. Recapping, stocks are higher with the S&P holding above 5,200, 5,207 right now, up by about 0.4%. Balance of power continues. Back we go. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, we thank you. Welcome to the Thursday edition, Little Friday, Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, on YouTube, and of course, Bloomberg TV. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I am Joe Matthew, compelled by the math today, which always gets a little bit dangerous. But the numbers don't lie, Kaylee. In the effort to oust the Speaker of the House yesterday, this is Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the MTV by MTG. 196 House Republicans voted to table the motion. 163 Democrats did too. You couldn't have done it without them. But 11 Republicans voted to oust the Speaker of the House. Kaylee, that's more than many expected, and it makes us all wonder if we're done with this now as we prepare to bring in Brian Stile from Capitol Hill, or if this is going to become part of the new reality where we keep going through this over and over again.
Well, we weren't sure we were going to go through this when it became clear that Democrats were going to save Mike Johnson if proved necessary. The conversation we were having before 5 p.m. yesterday was, this is an effort on the part of Marjorie Taylor Greene that is dead. And then she surprised us all on the House floor, actually making this move. So what exactly happened here? And perhaps more importantly, what is going to happen as a consequence? Congressman Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, is with us now. So Congressman, I'm not sure how surprised you were by the move of your colleague last night. Certainly we were taken aback. What should happen now to Marjorie Taylor Greene and her role within the House of Representatives?
This has been a challenging Congress and a narrow majority, and there's a small subset of individuals that would rather throw the House into chaos that allow us to get the work done. 11 Republicans and a handful of far progressive leftists joined together to throw the House into chaos. At the end of the day, we were able to table the motion with overwhelming numbers. And why? Because I think on the whole, Mike Johnson has actually done a very admirable job in incredibly difficult circumstances. Time and again, we hear people saying that we're not going to be able to get it done in the House of Representatives, yet we've done it time and again, whether or not that's the debt ceiling, whether or not that's passing the appropriations bills that spends less this year than last year on everything other than veterans and defense, or whether or not that's moving through other key items like the defense supplemental and making sure that we're standing with our ally Israel. And so Speaker Johnson has done an admirable job. It's frustrating that we continue to have a small subset of members that would rather see us thrown into chaos than focused in on the biggest issues.
I'm going to ask you about a couple of those, Congressman, but I wonder if you're compelled by what Donald Trump is saying publicly about Mike Johnson. We're trying to figure out what he meant. With a majority of 1, he writes, shortly growing to 3 or 4, we are not in a position of voting on a motion to vacate. At some point, he writes, we may very well be. Do you know what point he's talking about?
I'll let the president speak for himself. He's got a large PR team. My view here is that what we need to be is focused in between now and the election and persuading the American people why we're the party that needs to remain in charge in the House of Representatives. But in a large part, we need to grow our majority. We obviously have a small set of members who are interested in the chaos and in the dysfunction. Many of us would rather get on with the work of the American people on absolutely essential bills, in particular addressing the reckless spending and the broken border that we continue to see plague Americans.
Well, certainly there are a lot of issues that are in focus domestically, Congressman, but also issues in focus geopolitically. Of course, we have seen the Biden administration pausing a shipment of offensive large bombs to Israel over concerns of the way in which they may be used in a full-scale invasion of Rafah. I know that you have put out a statement. You are not pleased with this decision from the administration, but there is precedent for this, sir. This has been done by both Democratic and Republican administrations in the past. What exactly is the problem here?
I think the president made the wrong move in trying to prevent that shipment of weapons that are authorized by the United States House of Representatives, the Senate, and the president himself from being able to be distributed. In particular, at a period of time where we're all concerned about civilians getting in the way, precision missiles from the United States actually allow the military in Israel to target terrorists from Hamas and protect innocent civilian life. So the action by the president is actually a step in the complete wrong direction. We should be making sure that the resources we provided through the defense supplemental to Israel are delivered and allow Israel to complete this war successfully, get the hostages returned, and defeat the terrorist group Hamas.
These weapons, though, the 2,000-pound bombs and the 500-pound bombs, Congressman, were separate from the supplemental that was passed and the president signed, correct? He did make the point in this interview on CNN that we would continue to fulfill replenishing the Iron Dome and so forth. That's what that legislation called for, right?
But broadly speaking, it's the overall funding that is the United States in support of Israel for them to complete the termination of Hamas as a functioning operation and terrorist organization in Gaza. And so when we see these funds going to Israel, it's to protect civilians in Israel, but also the opportunity to make sure that we're allowing the Israeli military to have the highest technology and the most functional, sophisticated weaponry to be able to target terrorists in Gaza and be able to protect civilians. This is literally the exact opposite of what the president should be doing. We should be working to get Hamas to surrender and have them release the hostages, and applying pressure by removing their military capability allows Israel to do just that.
Congressman, I'm wondering, as you're hearkening back to a supplemental package that, again, included defensive weapons for Israel primarily, in addition to aid for other allies, including Ukraine, there is policy in existence in the weapons that we are sending to Ukraine. The U.S. is not supportive of, say, Ukraine offensively striking in Russian territory, for example. There are guardrails around. Why are these two conflicts different in your mind?
The president has some grounds to provide those types of guardrails in his position as commander-in-chief. I'm critiquing him in the decision that he is making because I think it is the wrong decision and not in the best interest of the United States of America. These conflicts are different, and the most critical way that they are is a terrorist group, Hamas, went and captured innocent Israeli civilians, including American civilians, and continues to hold them captive today in Gaza. So the support for Israel is to allow them to simply defend themselves, but also the necessary offensive capabilities to end the terrorist group Hamas and get their civilians returned. That's in contrast with what's playing out in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, let me just turn that around for a moment, Congressman, because I find this to be a really compelling conversation. Should we consider providing Ukraine with offensive weaponry? Because Russia came into Ukraine much the way Hamas came into Israel. They certainly don't see it differently.
Well, the United States has provided, obviously, offensive weaponry to Ukraine. The question is whether or not that weaponry should be utilized outside the country. We all want to make sure that this conflict does not continue to involve more countries than it currently does. We don't want to escalate the situation. I'm of the view that making sure that the Ukrainian military has the weapons that they need to be able to defend their country, to allow their men and women on the front lines to be able to fight back against an unjust and unprovoked invasion from Russia is appropriate. But I think there are reasonable steps we need to make sure that we're not unnecessarily increasing the conflict in Ukraine.
Congressman, given your role on the Financial Services Committee, I want to ask you about another matter here at home. We just got the announcement from the Senate Banking Committee that the financial regulators, including Michael Barr of the Fed and Marty Grunberg of the FDIC, will be testifying before the committee next week. This is after that scathing third-party independent report into a toxic workplace culture at the FDIC was released earlier this week. Many of your colleagues on the committee have called for the resignation of the chair as a result. But is that the way to fix this problem, sir, or is something else needed?
When you have this level of cultural rot that's occurring at the FDIC, as indicated by the most recent report that comes out, it's absolutely necessary that Mr. Grunberg resign. he's going to come before us maybe on Wednesday if he doesn't resign before and have to answer a series of very difficult questions. This report makes it very clear. The cultural rot at the FDIC goes far down through the management chain. It's clear they need new management at the FDIC, and I'm concerned that the people protecting him are interested because he has a seat at the table as it relates to bank regulation, in particular bank capital standards, as we're exploring Basel III Endgame.
So what's going to happen following this hearing?
Well, ultimately, I think he should resign today. If he fails to do that, I think this hearing will flush out for the American people that he should resign. If he's not, he should ultimately be removed. But this hearing will flush out for a lot of the American people that didn't take the time to read the report yet just how terrible the cultural rot is at the FDIC.
It's quite a statement. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks for being generous with your time, as always. Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, with us here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, alongside Kaylee Lyons. A lot to talk about there and to look forward to next week, Kaylee. Can you imagine, by the way, it was 1 week ago that it was 90 degrees here in the nation's capital. There's a lot of talk about climate at the time. Apparently, there should have also been talk about economic impact. The cost of the heat is something that we're talking about today in the new Big Take DC podcast.
Indeed, or at least Saleha Mohsen is. She is our senior Washington correspondent and the host of that podcast. She's joining us now here in studio. So Saleha, especially at a time when we are all laser focused on everything that factors into the U.S. economy, whatever could be inflationary or hit growth, as we're considering the future trajectory of the economy and of interest rate policy as a result, how does climate factor in?
Heat is bad. It's all what small businesses are dealing with the last few summers. In 2023, from June to August, we saw record levels of heat across the 50 states. And there's a new government report that says this coming summer is going to be just as bad, if not worse.
Oh, boy.
More than half the country is going to see higher than normal temperatures. And not just Texas, where it's always hot. We're talking about Portland, Maine, and Nebraska, and Ohio, and California.
Well, you got me at the cost of a lobster roll doubling, because that goes straight into my heart. But now that you have our attention, where does Washington come into play here? Does this confound the Fed? Does this make it impossible for the administration to forecast when it comes to the economy?
This hits Washington a couple of different ways. Yes, the Fed, because when you're talking about inflation, electricity costs are something that are on the rise and are a huge burden on households and small businesses, large businesses. But let's talk about 2024. Biden is facing a lot of questions and struggling to persuade people that he's done something for the economy. Our own Bloomberg polling that we do with Morning Consult shows that more people trust Trump in swing states when it comes to the economy than Biden. But if we're about to have a summer just before Americans vote, where small businesses have a multi-billion-dollar impact on their costs because it's so hot they can't keep ice cream cool, and they can't sell lobsters because they've had to double the price because seas and oceans are too warm to have lobsters. This is a problem. On that podcast, I did talk to a Dallas Fed economist, Emily Kerr, who did a really deep dive into this with a survey. Listen to what she has to say about how this hurt manufacturers.
Their lost revenue came from lower productivity, lower labor productivity, temperature-sensitive work sites. And so these manufacturing companies were having to give workers more breaks, provide a lot more water, maybe pull back from outside and sort of exertion roles whenever it was so hot.
So just looking at Texas, where it's already so hot, when you have 45 days of 100-degree plus weather, that's a record. And small businesses faced a $9.5 billion hit from that. Texas makes up a lot of the American economy. And then you're talking about a lot of states having hot temperatures.
It's funny, you were talking about how voters are waiting to see if Joe Biden can make good on promises. I thought you were going to say the climate. You said the economy. Where are young voters on promises to manage the climate when we see, for instance, the headlines on an LNG pause, for instance? Is he moving in the right direction when it comes to young voters who see that in many cases as a single issue?
It's a complicated issue because as much as you want to focus on climate and address this on a national scale, you have to work globally and have partnerships. The U.S. and China struggles in a lot of areas in terms of coming to an agreement or having common ground. Climate is one of them, but that relationship is still facing a lot of trouble. So there's the world's two biggest economies can't really come together easily to do anything on climate. The other complexity there is geopolitical status. You know, if we are still reliant on oil, but also still need to power up our defense spending, nuclear program, where does that fall on the spectrum of climate change?
Yeah, well, especially if you're trying to transition into a clean net zero economy, you're still going to need traditional energy sources in the interim period of time. It can't just happen overnight. This is such a fascinating point of discussion. Really great to have you, Saleha Mohsen, as the host of our Big Take DC podcast. You can, of course, find that wherever you get your podcast. It drops every Thursday.
Yes,
subscribe while you're at it. You can subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast as well. The other thing to think about, Joe, when we're talking about climate and economics is that lower income communities often feel the effects of heat, for example, to a much larger degree than others because they live in areas, especially in urban areas, where there's not as much tree cover, things of that nature. There's so much to consider in this conversation.
Well, that's for sure. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. We get our sneak peek here on Thursdays, but the podcast is just about to drop, and we'll put an ear on it because you're right. These are the very voters that Joe Biden needs to reconstruct his victory from 2020. Saleha, great to have you, and thank you as always. We've got a lot to follow here, Kaylee, as we hand the baton to New York in a special edition of Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic. They're live at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in San Francisco. That's where Joe Biden is today.
Yeah,
or will be.
California after Wisconsin yesterday.
Yeah.
Everywhere but Washington, apparently. Don't worry, though. Joe and I are still here in D.C., and we'll see you later on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live on radio, TV, on YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We are not in New York. We've got a special edition.
Yeah, we're out here in San Francisco at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. I got to say, it is just a beautiful, beautiful day here in San Francisco.
And I have to say, walking into this venue, man, it's everybody and anybody in the world of technology. And we're going to be hearing about, yes, AI, but so much more. Hey, coming up, first of all, a lot of important conversations already happening up on stage.
Yeah, right now we're hearing from Chris Cox, the Chief Product Officer over at Microsoft. He's on stage downstairs here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. We already heard from former WeWork CEO Adam Newman all about his new project, plus much more great speakers coming up a little later, including Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn and PayPal.
Just a few important names. Also coming up is Aileen Lee of Cowboy Ventures. Man, why we matter, why she matters is she's really understanding what are some of the companies to invest in for the future. She also coined the term unicorn, so I'm curious about what she sees as the unicorns of the future.
I'm also curious to get thoughts from our own Brad Stone. He's the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's right here. You can't see him yet. We're not going to him yet, but he's going to give us the lay of the land here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit and really talk a little bit about what went into planning this and what he hopes that attendees get out of it.
I want to know when he talks to Amica. That's what I want to hear about. I want an Amica
It's
for my
a
home.
humanoid robot, by the way, so.
All right. Hey, listen, folks, we've got stocks headed toward their highest level in about a month. So let's head back to New York headquarters and our own Charlie Pellet. We got to get a check on the trade today.
Thank you very much, Carol and Tim. In fact, best level of the day just about right now on the S&P, 5204. Perhaps the key takeaway there, we're holding above 5,200. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio and Television to find out how things shake out at the closing bell. But again, worth repeating, 5204 on the S&P, up right now by 0.3%. Highest level in a month, adding to a rebound that has been fueled by speculation. The Federal Reserve will cut rates this year. The Dow up 250 now, up 0.6%. NASDAQ up 30, higher by 0.2%. 10-year 4.45%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.81%. Spot gold up $26 the ounce to $23.34 now, higher by 1.1%. And crude little changed, up by just under 0.1%, 79.06 a barrel. After earnings, we've got Airbnb dropping by 7%. After earnings, ARM Holdings down now by just about 1.8%. So again, S&P 500 index 5203, up by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Back we go to the Bloomberg Tech Summit. Once again, your hosts Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec.
Hey, thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really do appreciate it. Once again, Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec live here in San Francisco at the Bloomberg Technology Summit. And fair to say, Carol, we've already heard from a great lineup of speakers. I mentioned Flo's Adam Newman, formerly of WeWork. Fei Lee, they call her the godmother of AI, yeah. And she's also a professor. Heard from her a little earlier. Snap CEO Evan Spiegel, also here at this event. We've got a great lineup.
It's really fun to see the networking going on. We've also got our own star, and we're talking about Brad Stone. He is the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He's also, of course, the author of numerous books, including those on Amazon, Amazon Unbound, and so much more, joining us here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. Actually, you have invited us in, so thank you so much for that. First of all, I feel like there's so much going on, AI, yes, but tell us about, Brad, the conversations you guys had as a team about what you wanted to cover here.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We do these every year, and we try not to repeat ourselves. And last year, we were really talking about the emergence of ChatGPT. It had gotten everybody talking. And so, of course, we had Sam Altman as our keynote speaker. And you can't invite the same people every year. But the other thing that's happened is it has started a movement. And so we thought, well, who else do we want? And the first names that sprung to mind are the founders of Anthropic, siblings, Dario and Daniela Amodei. They actually worked at OpenAI and spun out, maybe with an implicit objection to how OpenAI was being run. That's where we started the day, and it's really set the tone for the conversations today. You mentioned Fei Lee. We have Vinod Khosla, Reid Hoffman coming later. really, I think where we settled on was like, let's find some of the architects of this moment and ask them the hard questions about, are we really kind of comfortable where we're going, or is this an arms race that is propelling everyone forward just to win? And what does that mean?
So what does that mean? Because, you know, if we think about where we were a year ago when everybody was playing with ChatGPT, GPT-4 had basically just come out a little over a year ago when you had the tech summit here. Where are we this year with the run-up in NVIDIA? You have Amazon investing in Anthropic. You have all the OpenAI drama that happened at the end of last year. Where are we when it comes to sort of like AI being in prime time this year?
Yes. I will answer with something that you will never hear on the stage downstairs.
Okay.
I don't know. We are in an age of remarkable, what I call AI ambiguity. There's so many things we don't know. So for example, Meta has open sourced the Llama 3 model. What does that mean for these other companies that have spent hundreds of millions, maybe soon billions, to train and operate a model? What does it mean that you can now get the technology for free? Will chatbots be a thing that we regularly use, or are they a novel expression of the technology and then they'll fade away? Are there lanes for startups outside of what all the big tech companies that have the resources are doing with AI? These are great questions. I actually don't think that anybody has the answer. I think that even when I think about social media explosion or on-demand apps fueled by the iPhone, that we sort of had a sense of where, okay, well, this is cool, and people will find it useful. And I just think everything from how we'll use it to what the economics will look like are still completely up in the air.
I love that you went there, because I do feel like we've all been agog, if you will, right, on NVIDIA and the chips and so on and so forth. Coming off of Milken, I just came, and people too even are like trying to assess where do we allocate the money going forward. So much of what I heard, Brad, was data centers, right, and infrastructure build out. Like people were still like, we haven't quite figured out the applications of AI. Going forward.
I think that's true. Where I'm sort of bullish, and let's use an example of the good old Bloomberg terminal, where you really need to know how to get information from the terminal, right? We know a whole lexicon, and that's pretty similar to other computer systems. They'll do what you tell them to do, and often you need to speak a particular language, maybe even coding. And what AI is, I think of it as like a new user interface where you can express yourself either with a voice command or a written command in a plain language and have it respond and have it do things for you. Yeah. I think that as like, and I think we're going to see at I.O. next week with Google and WWDC with Apple, them baking it into their devices and basically creating a new way to use technology.
Is it too early to say, Brad, that we're in an era right now like we were with the web browser in the 90s, sort of the dawn of the internet? You know, the tech bubble notwithstanding, but the idea that there was this new technology that fundamentally changed not just the way we live, but the way we interact with each other and the way that we spend money.
I'm going to go back to my handy AI ambiguity and say, I don't know. I mean, if this is the domain of only the biggest companies that can afford it and their proxies, like Anthropic, then maybe it isn't a giant sea that lifts all boats. Maybe, this is going to be owned by 4 or 5 companies and governments around the world, and it will concentrate their power. The arrival of the web browser was the arrival of all sorts of entrepreneurial opportunity. To your point, we had a rise and then a crash and then a rise again. I don't think it's clear that this is ready, set, go for everyone. It's very expensive to run these models. They'll maybe regulated, as Fei Li said earlier today. If you regulate them, you could create a powerful black market based on open source models. So all sorts of sort of unresolved issues. And I'm just not sure, despite the fact that you go to Y Combinator, any startup community here, and all you will see and hear about are AI startups. I'm just not sure how big the opportunity is going to be. We'll see.
Hey, Adam Newman, you think about cycles, right, in technology, and we're trying to still figure out, right, the AI cycle going forward. But what did you want to know, or what, Adam Newman, in terms of, you think about WeWork, how it was a cover of Bloomberg Business Week, maybe several times, I can't remember.
Before Brad's time.
Yeah.
Before Brad's time. But nonetheless,
well, it's a great story.
We talked so much about that company and where it was going, and obviously it's gone through its things. What did you want to know?
Well, first of all, I felt so privileged to be able to bring his particular brand of charismatic lunacy. That's, I don't mean in a harsh way. No. He's entertaining as heck. He exudes charisma. He's at it again. He's trying to buy WeWork out of bankruptcy.
Right.
So that was the first topic. They've not taken his bid, and he was clearly signaling that he's going to appeal. That they think that the creditors should have looked at his bid more carefully. That he had the higher bid. He said that the current creditors who won the deal are making promises they can't keep. So that was the first topic. Then we asked about Flow, his residential real estate company. This idea of spending hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire properties and then not just be a landlord, but to use technology to create community and a sense of belonging. It's Adam bringing his classic sense of, quasi-mysticism into the world of business. And I was like, why do you keep doing that?
It sounds a lot like WeWork.
Yeah, why do you keep doing that, But it's who he is, and he's somebody who speaks from the heart. I asked him a little bit, wanted to know about whether he was different. And I really do get the sense that, one, he's got a confrontational board now that's going to say no to him. He didn't have that before. And that, two,
there's a couple adults in the board.
Well, there were before, but maybe they weren't acting like it. And that he even said that on his latest proposal, Mark Andreessen told him no. Yeah. So that's interesting. I'm not sure Masayoshi-san ever told him no. And then the third thing was I wanted to know from him how he was different as a CEO. And he mentioned the board, and he also mentioned advice that Jeff Bezos had given him to always talk last in a meeting, because otherwise you're going to kind of pollute the water and sway people's opinion. And I said, are you able to follow that advice? He goes, well. And his CFO was sitting in the audience and gave us a kind of half-hearted thumbs up. So maybe something to work on.
So do you see him pulling off the WeWork out of bankruptcy?
I don't know if he will win that deal. I think that the creditors are required, and it is in their personal interest to get the most money for the debt that exists and to bring the company out of the bankruptcy. And the fact that they've chosen this other path suggests to me, and I haven't really looked at it, but that it may be a more complicated picture that Adam has presented, and that it may not only be about a popularity contest. And I also asked him to explain to me why WeWork should be in Flow, and whether it was just a personal mission of redemption. And I wasn't sure I really fully believed that those two companies belong together, and that it wasn't a little emotional for him. In fact, he said that it was. Yeah. So, and maybe there are personal reasons. The question that they don't want to resell WeWork to Adam Neumann, we can all imagine what they are. He wasn't, the company had problems under his leadership. And the question is, are those personal reasons, do they meet a valid legal test?
It's fascinating if you think about the pandemic and how we're rethinking how we work and what kind of office space is ultimately needed. Like, his thinking about this concept of having flexible workspace, like as you need it, wasn't so far-fetched. It's just timing and maybe execution. And
I would say this. I think that the history of real estate is Donald Trump as Exhibit A is a history of ups and downs, bubbles and crashes. We're seeing in China right now. Business Week, we did a list of all the billionaires that have lost everything betting on the Chinese. So that's no different. The difference is he wrote it a little higher, wrapped in a mantle of being a technology company and trying to take it public as a tech company, and then wrote it even lower because investors ultimately didn't buy the vision.
Can we talk about Amica?
Well, it's a humanoid robot.
I am obsessed.
Yes. This is a humanoid robot developed by Engineered Arts, a company in Cornwall, England. I'm about to go in either a career high or a career low.
You're good with this
I'm
kind
going
of
to go
stuff.
on stage and interview the robot.
So it's going to answer your questions in real time?
Yes. Yeah. It's creepily human-like. It speaks, and I presume should be addressed as a female. That's a choice. That's a choice. It's really remarkably, I wouldn't say it's lifelike, but because
expressive.
I did some tests, it's expressive, and it's designed to make people feel comfortable with it. To me, even though it's a British project, it very much reminds me of the Japanese bipedal robots of the past, and Sony and Samsung, and they were always working on them. The Japanese love their bipedal robots.
It's certainly it's an incredible novelty, but we should note that there are lots of companies working on robots like this to help in warehouses. Think about what it would do to a company like Amazon to be able to have, pickers.
This Amica, I hope at least, does not move. Because if you see me running across the stage, that's fine. But I don't know that it's an ambulatory.
Not yet.
Now, I did ask, and it's running ChatGPT 4 Turbo.
Right.
So I think that's interesting.
So explain what that means.
That it's
EOS essentially.
Yeah, that Engineered Arts has developed the machine, but the brains are borrowed using the API of OpenAI and ChatGPT. Well, that's interesting going forward. That maybe robot makers don't need to worry as much about main general intelligence, that they could hook into one of these large models, use the API, and they can be more engineering companies that think about things like how the joints work, how balance works. As you mentioned, Carol, the expressiveness of the robot.
So does that mean she's not connected to the cloud right now?
Oh, I would imagine that she is.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if Wi-Fi goes down.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
But she doesn't answer.
Just make sure she's on the right network, okay?
Exactly.
I was thinking, Tim and I were talking about the hotel we're staying. We're not going to say where it is, but it's like, right, we couldn't get anybody to answer the call. So we could have used Amica to answer our phone call and help us answer some questions.
There is the RSA conference happening here in San Francisco right now, which is huge.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's you wouldn't need Amica to do that. You would need an Alexa or a ChatGPT.
Right.
And then robots can just be these physical things. And the question is, do we really need a bipedal robot that's trying to trick us into thinking that it's human? Or will they be, Tim, you mentioned industrial robots, little things that do very specific tasks, deliver the mail, deliver packages, that kind of thing.
Hey, can I ask you what's the biggest, I know AI, as you go through today, what are you looking for a question to be answered or something? I think you know so much this world. Is there something top of mind for you?
I think we all want to know where it's going. I guess specifically, we've seen since the September of 2022, every successive model of ChatGPT or any of these other chatbots has been step change improvements fed by more and more data and more processing power and money running on NVIDIA chips. So my question is that going to continue, or are we hitting a natural limit either in the money that we could spend to train the available processors, or just the model maxes out, and it's not giving us step change improvements anymore?
Good stuff from Brad Stone, as always. We've got more, including we're going to continue with AI, folks. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing very close to session highs right now on the S&P 500 index, holding at 5205 above 5200. Right now the S&P up 0.3%. Dow Industrials up 254, up 0.7. We've got NASDAQ up 30, up by 0.2%. 10-year 4.45% with a 2-year 4.80%. Gold up 1.1%, 23.35 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.2%, WTI 79.12 a barrel. Bitcoin up 1%, 62,155 on Bitcoin. Apple is going to deliver some of its upcoming AI features this year via data centers equipped with its own in-house processors. Apple shares are right now up by 0.8%. And sources tell Bloomberg, Google parent Alphabet has been progressing in talks to acquire marketing software provider HubSpot. Alphabet shares down 0.3%. HubSpot now down by 0.1%. Recapping, S&P up 15 to 5203, up by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, as you just heard from Brad Stone, no doubt about it that artificial intelligence is definitely front and center here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. We've heard CEOs from Anthropic, Hugging Face, Pika Labs, execs from Meta and OpenAI all taking center stage, really to talk about the opportunities, the concerns, the hazards, all of that. It's what happens when you innovate.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Rachel Metz has seen this all firsthand. She's been covering AI for longer than we've even known about ChatGPT. I mean, going all the way back to 2018. So she's had a front row seat to all of this, especially over the last 18 months, as we've seen it really just take center stage, not just on Wall Street and not just in Silicon Valley, but I think fair to say in everyday life, or at least that's the hope for these companies developing it. Rachel Metz is artificial intelligence reporter for Bloomberg News. She joins us here from the Bloomberg Tech Summit. So Rachel, I'm just trying to get an idea for where we are when it comes to this quote-unquote AI revolution. If you were to describe this like a baseball game, what inning are we in?
Ooh, I would say that AI has been around for a long time, longer than probably a lot of people have been thinking about it. But as far as the evolution of it, if we use a baseball analogy, I'd say we're still in the very early innings. A lot has been learned. We know a lot about machine learning and how that works, and come up with different ways to create AI systems. But I think almost everybody would agree this is still the very early stages of figuring out how to make machines do what we want them to do, learn from data, that sort of stuff.
Well, it's so interesting. We've had conversations with you to kind of understand, where's the exuberance and where's the kind of reality. Because yes, AI has been around for a long time. You talk to the financial community, right? They've talked about it. They've been using it. This is, though, generative AI. It's taking it to a different level, right? So make the distinction for our audience again about why this is a whole new ballgame.
I mean, I think what we're seeing now is some of it is a technological shift and technological advancements. I think a lot of it is also a mind shift, right? You've got people, I think the average person is starting to understand more about how this technology could be used in their everyday lives. With something like ChatGPT and some of the other generative AI tools, you're able to more personally interrogate these things. See if I type something in and I get back an image, or I get back a chat that sounds convincingly human, you're getting more of a sense of what you might be able to use this for, whether that's something good or something bad. That's a whole other debate, right? But I think that people are sort of understanding more how this could impact them, and that's a big shift than in the past when it felt more sort of under the surface, and people like me would be keeping an eye on it, but it might not be something that everybody was thinking about a lot.
I mean, I must confess, I'm not totally convinced how it's going to impact my life. I mean, I've talked to executives from Verizon, for example, who say, okay, we're able to go through and understand what people have questions about and develop products and services to answer those questions, because we can take all of these questions that they've been asking and create answers for those questions. That makes sense to me. Taking all that data, understanding what we're calling about. But what else is the promise out there? What do you see as the impact?
What do I see? I mean, I think that what we're starting to see is a lot of tools that people could use for filmmaking. I've been writing a lot about tools for videos and filmmaking, music, things like that, maybe personal assistant type stuff, which some people are really excited about. If it could automate some tasks or make it easier to do certain things related to work, things that people aren't that excited about doing. I could see how that might be a positive in the future. But right now, I feel like there's still like a lot of proving out that needs to be done.
Okay, I want to go to Apple.
Yes.
I thought you were going to go to songs.
No.
And how Taylor Swift could have maybe used AI on her latest drop.
No, I think what's great about Taylor Swift is that she's a person and that she's writing this stuff, okay? So,
but they could get an assist.
The talk of Twitter and Threads this week is this new ad from Apple for the iPad. And it just like couldn't have landed any worse. It's the idea that they're crushing creativity, instruments.
Interesting.
You know, it's pretty remarkable. We have some images of it up right now. You can see a crushing piano if you're listening or if you're watching this on TV. Let's just say it didn't land the way that Apple wants it to land. You have a story out that talks about music being produced using AI, music being written using AI. Isn't there something lost when we rely on computers to do things that, I mean, do I sound like a Luddite here?
No,
Am I
no,
crazy?
I don't think you do at all. I mean, I agree with you on the Apple ad. Like, I understand what I understand what the message was they were trying to get across, and it like totally failed. At least for a certain segment of their audience who was mad. I also was like, what is this? This is not cool. As far as the music stuff, I mean, I think it depends on a few things. It depends on how you're using it, what you're doing with it, what your aims are. On the one hand, I see how it could enable a lot more people to make music. And how it could be used as an additional tool for musicians and people who are mixing and editing music to enhance music they're already making. But on the other hand, yeah, I could see there's some really serious potential downsides. If like really crappy AI-generated music is flooding a service like Spotify, people will be mad. And also, you then start to just see like the quality degrade of this stuff, and people might say, well, what is the point of all this? There are also a lot of copyright concerns that this stuff brings up as far as what it's trained on. So I think in the next few months, in the next year or so, we're gonna see where things land on that. I think some of these companies and record labels and music stakeholders are talking to each other. We know the record industry is pretty historically litigious, so we'll see. Maybe they'll come up with some agreements. Maybe there will be some lawsuits. Maybe both.
Yeah, you do wonder who owns it, like in an AI world, because it's coming from data that's out in the universe
But that's
that
actually,
might help you create.
That's a really good point, because if you think about what Reddit was so excited about with its IPO was that they had this data set that they can license out to get trained on.
Right.
Could music publishers, rights holders, license those songs and have a different revenue stream by doing that?
In theory, yeah. It's really complicated because of the way the music industry works, and there are a lot of different stakeholders and holders of licenses for different pieces of the music publishing pipeline. So I think it's going to take some time to shake out. There's also a bunch of copyright suits already winding their way through courtrooms related to other generative AI companies like Midjourney and Stability AI. So you could certainly see, you also could see, one of the legal experts I talked to said it's possible that a judge might say fair use applies to training data for certain kinds of media, but not others. So perhaps fair use would apply for generating images, but maybe not for generating music. And I think it's going to take a long time for all that to shake out.
So innovation, great. AI, we'll see.
We'll see.
But also lawyers, they're going to be busy. All right, I want to get to, it's the new issue of Bloomberg Business Week. It's a special issue. It's all in on technology. And one of the neat features is you guys identify kind of the leaders that we need to be watching, or the leaders for tomorrow. And some of them might be a little bit already established, some of them maybe not. And that's kind of what this event is. It's names you're going to know and maybe names you should know. So tell us about some of how you guys came up with that list.
Yeah, so one of the names, and this is someone I've spoken to a few times for stories, is Demi Guo, and her company is called Pika. And Pika does generative video. So you type in a prompt and you can get a video. And one of the cool things that they're doing is they keep adding on these different features to their video products. So like they added sound effects, because if you think about it, if you're generating a video right now, you're just generating, a silent video. There's no sounds with it. So like you could have a sizzling sound, like bacon sizzling in a pan.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. And they added something just the other day, it's styles. So you can generate a video in a certain kind of style.
How is it different than something like Sora from OpenAI?
Well, it's already something people can use.
Because they're holding Sora back.
They haven't set a release date for it yet, as far as that's.
But they've shown off what it can do.
Absolutely, but my understanding of it is it still takes quite a. It can produce very high resolution videos, and they're pretty lengthier than what other people are doing. But I understand it's quite expensive, and also it's quite slow. In general, generating a video is pretty slow at this point, because if you think about generating an image, that's not very slow. But then think about how many chunks or frames, depending on what technology they're using to do it, it's going to take a lot longer.
So no musicians, no filmmakers.
What?
No musicians, no filmmakers needed.
Well, you know, it's so
no, we need them. These are just tools.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
I keep telling, I'm just coming off of Milken, and one of the discussions were that there were a lot of people saying that what are the jobs that are going to be lost because of AI? And we keep hearing, no, it's going to be adjacent. People are going to be working alongside AI. How are you thinking about that aspect of it?
I mean, it's tough. On the one hand, I feel like it's really hard to know. I think what I suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect what we may see is what looks like some job loss. We've already seen certain job losses that are either attributed to AI or said because of AI. I wouldn't be shocked if some people end up getting hired back, at least in the short term, because companies realize, wait, this is not, as far as I can tell, I don't think anybody can be replaced by AI at this point in time. I would be very, very surprised by that.
Is there anything out there that really excites you right now?
Oh my gosh, what an open-ended question.
It's a good way to end.
You can go anywhere you want.
No, I mean, I'm really interested in seeing how there's a lot of talk about data and is there more data? Do we have enough data to sustain, these larger and larger models? And I'm curious to see where more data comes from if we start using synthetic data, the goods and the bads that could come with that, and also if we start seeing people working on new types of AI models, building them in different ways. That's something that I've been looking around for and seeing a couple companies working on that. And that I think is interesting. Because just like we have all kinds of buildings, different kinds of building architectures, so too can we have different kinds of AI model architectures.
The idea that there isn't enough data makes me...
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Yeah.
In this data, intensive world, it's kind of crazy.
Well, we have produced data right here by talking.
Exactly. We created it. We own it.
We own it.
Rachel, we always appreciate it. You really do get through a lot of the static and explain AI. Thank you so much. Rachel Metz, who follows AI for Bloomberg.
Hey, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. for a check of the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris standing by. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country will stand alone if it has to in its war against Hamas, threatening to deepen a crisis in relations with the United States. This after President Biden had warned that he will stop additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if the country goes ahead with the ground invasion of Rafah in Gaza. Now, some Republican senators say they're crafting a resolution condemning the Biden decision to suspend shipment of those weapons. One of the senators is Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina.
It's a horribly bad decision and dangerous because it does put the hostages more at risk. It makes the war go on longer. It emboldens Iran at a time they need to be contained.
Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen disagrees, saying that emboldening the enemy is not likely.
This will not embolden Hamas in any way. What it will do is make it clear that as you go after Hamas, don't create more civilian casualties.
Van Hollen says Hamas benefits from the humanitarian crisis. In court, adult film actress Stormy Daniels on the witness stand in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. Trump's lawyer told the judge that the defense plans to renew its call for a mistrial based on Daniels' testimony. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks continuing to advance with the S&P 500 index now at 5209, just about the best level of the day. S&P up 22, higher by 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 293. That is a gain of 0.75%. Nasdaq up 46, higher now by 0.3%. 10-year 4.44% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.80%. Spot gold up $27 the ounce, up 1.2%, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, $79.34 a barrel. Stock market on track for its highest level in a month, adding to a rebound that has been fueled by speculation that the Fed will cut rates this year. A government watchdog will audit the FAA's oversight of maintenance practices at United Airlines after a series of mishaps involving the carrier. Shares of UAL, they are down today by 0.2%. Recapping, S&P just about the best level of the day, up 22 points now at 5209, up 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Silicon Valley, no question, buzzing about AI. We've been talking about it, but venture capital deal-making, Carol, it's still suppressed. I got some stats here. Here's some numbers, okay? Yeah. Here in the U.S., VCs poured $36.6 billion into startups in the first quarter of the year. That's according to PitchBook. The funding went to 2,800 companies. On both measures, it's a nearly 30% decrease compared with the same period in 2023. So the takeaway is startups had their worst funding year last year since 2019. This year, it's starting off even worse. So despite all the excitement.
Well, we've got a great voice to really talk to us about the startup community. Aileen Lee is with us. She's the founder and managing partner of the VC firm Cowboy Ventures. They invest mostly in software companies based here in the U.S. And we should say that her firm has made more than 100 early-stage investments, specializing in seed rounds. She's on site with us. The other thing is she has done the data analysis that is the reason we use the word unicorn when it comes to startups. We love data here at Bloomberg. How are you?
I am so happy to be here.
Well, tell us about the VC world. Like, give us an idea. It's a great indicator in terms of the health of the economy.
Yeah, so we just finished a panel, myself, Kirsten Green, and Ade from Base 10 with Tom Giles, who's the tech editor for Bloomberg Tech, right. And we talked about what's going on. So, like you mentioned, we had a big slowdown last year. A lot of people put their pencils down. They're both, like, it felt like there was a falling knife in terms of public markets, which obviously affects the private markets. And so people said it's not a great time to be investing in private companies. I do think that we're seeing quite a pickup this year, but it's largely driven by AI, which is great. It's very exciting. It is the new hotness in venture capital. So you just have to, it can be quite treacherous, I think, to invest in AI right now because it's, you know, obviously there's a lot of energy right now. We're kind of in a consolidation phase, and for very good reasons, right? With whether it's Microsoft or Meta or Salesforce or ServiceNow or Google, you need a lot of, and OpenAI, you need a lot of money. You need a lot of GPU. You need a lot of engineers. And so there's kind of this like tectonic plate war going on in the big tech players right now. And so if you've got a really big fund, you could try and align your, obviously most of these companies are public companies, right? So it's a great time for NVIDIA, AMD to be a public markets investor, to be able to get exposure to the AI that is going to be powering, I think, most applications for decades to come. But for private markets, I think there's just a lot of money going into startups, many of whom are not going to make it.
So the thing that's interesting about this, and Brad kind of alluded to it when we were talking to him, is the idea of it's so expensive to have this processing power, to buy these GPUs.
Yeah.
And it's not as easy as, 10, 15 years ago, creating an app and building a network, which was sort of what we saw venture capital support in that generation.
Yeah.
Is there a concern that, you do early stage investing, you do seed startups, you do seed investing. Is there a concern that these companies just can't raise the capital in order to support that?
So there are large models that the big technology companies are investing in that have billions of parameters that you need billions of dollars for GPUs. We have been investing at Cowboy Ventures. As you mentioned, we're seed stage investors. Actually, our first AI-driven enterprise software company we invested in 8 years ago, where they use what we call a small model, where they don't need to buy GPUs. They basically get a proprietary data set. In that case, the company's called Textio, and we basically got HR-related documents, job specs, performance reviews, and we train the AI using very situational specific parameters to basically understand how it can help people write performance reviews more effectively, how it can help people write job specs more effectively, and you just don't need the giant GPU to be able to do that work. And then also a lot of it is around how you solve the problem for everyday business users. Instead of them using Google Docs or Word, you need to figure out how would I get into their workflow, whether it's through Workday or Lattice, and how do I actually create those integrations so that the way that the AI can be in the business process of everyday people inside the enterprise. And so I think that's those kinds of business or industry-specific applications, you don't need billions of dollars to build those applications.
But is that scalable? Like, I'm listening to you. Is that scalable elsewhere?
Elsewhere meaning
other industries, like that model.
Completely. So we're seeing, I think a lot of there's the application layer and there's infrastructure, right? So there's money going into both. At the application layer, that's where a lot of VC funds are playing right now. So and it makes a lot of sense because so many people in whether it's the food and beverage industry, in hospitals, in education, people are still using pen, paper, spreadsheets. They're not actually leveraging the underlying data, and the applications they use every day are not smart. And so I think there's pretty much every industry and every application that we look at today is going to have new applications that are powered by AI. So it is a tremendous opportunity.
Okay, speaking of opportunities, I'm wondering what's more difficult in this world where cash can earn 4.5% to 5% in T-bills, okay? That's an opportunity.
Yeah.
What's harder right now? Is it harder to go raise money from investors to then deploy?
Yeah.
Or is it harder to find the companies to deploy that money into?
We're very fortunate. You know, we're a pretty disciplined fund. We've been around for over 10 years now. We've had pretty much the same investors, or what we call LP limited partners, for pretty much the 10 years. So we're very fortunate. And they are savvy investors who understand the upside of investing in venture capital firms, and they know it's a 10 to 15-year investment. So fortunately for us, it has definitely gotten harder, and I think in many ways it's good because it holds us very accountable. It's like there are benchmarks that you have to beat to be worth investing in, and that's our job, is to make sure that we beat those benchmarks fund after fund. And also we raise every 3 years or every 4 years. So you know you raise the fund and then you have 3 years to basically go find some great investments. So it's gotten quite competitive in private markets. A ton of money flooded in 2020, 2021, and it's probably not going to recede. And so there's just more money chasing private companies than ever.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Aileen, is with all the attention on AI, what's being neglected maybe in the venture world, or where do you think we should also be thinking about when it comes to tech innovation?
I mean, I do think, that's a really good question. I think the big boom when interest rates were basically zero in 2020 and 2021, it brought so much attention to the venture capital and technology world that actually what we would have considered long tail markets, parking garages, like companies selling software to parking garages got funded. Like the unicorn analysis that we did in 2013 versus 2023 showed a huge difference in the amount of money that's going to industry-specific software. So in the original unicorn analysis in 2013, it's quite interesting how it flip-flopped. It was 80% consumer companies and 20% enterprise software companies. 10 years later, it flip-flopped and it became 80% enterprise, 20% consumer. And in those enterprise, you've got climate tech companies, you've got agriculture companies, you've got companies serving parking garages. So entrepreneurs, especially I think since the iPhone debuted in 2007, pretty much everyone in the modern world understands the power of technology. And so if they work in a port, if they work at a nursing station, they understand how much inefficiency there is and how much opportunity there is for technology to actually reinvent the way they do things and let humans do what they do best better.
Still waiting for healthcare to really embrace technology in a big way.
Keep waiting.
If you need give you a chip with all my information. I'm ready to do that. I actually am.
If you need a copy of the X-ray, here's a CD-ROM for you. I'm not joking.
Earlier today, actually.
That's still the way it works.
I only had my chance to see Vinod Khosla speak earlier today with Emily Chang, and he was saying that the thing that he's going to tell President Biden tomorrow is that every person should have a personal doctor, and every kid should have a personal tutor, and that would reinvent both education and healthcare, and it would be amazing.
We have to wrap. Yes. Thank you so much.
today's headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Apple will deliver some of its upcoming artificial intelligence features this year via data centers equipped with its own in-house processors, all part of a sweeping effort to infuse its devices with AI capabilities. Apple shares today, part of a broader tech rally. We do have Apple shares up now by 1%. The gaming giant Roblox is seeing its shares plunge after the company reported a bookings forecast that fell short of analyst estimates for the second quarter. The San Mateo, California-based company forecast between $870 million and $900 million. Wall Street was expecting $902 million. Right now, we've got Roblox shares down by 21.2%. Warner Brothers Discovery reported sales and profit that fell short of analyst expectations as the entertainment giant wrestled with lower TV ad sales and poor performance of video games. The parent of CNN, TNT, and other cable networks generated sales of $9.96 billion in the first quarter, compared with the $10.3 billion average of projections on Wall Street and down 7% from a year earlier. And right now, we got Warner Brothers Discovery shares trading higher by 1.4%. AMC Entertainment Holdings, the largest movie theater chain, reported a first quarter loss, the result of a thinner slate of releases from Hollywood after last year's strikes by writers and directors. AMC now lower by 5.8%. And Robinhood Markets posted its second straight quarterly profit as higher interest rates and cryptocurrency trading fueled revenue growth. Shares of Robinhood down now by 4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a look at some of our company news, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenevec. We are live in lovely San Francisco. We're on a roof, and it's the Bloomberg Technology Summit, and it's really just this cross-section of everybody who's anybody, really, in the world of technology. AI definitely a topic, but so much more.
Yeah, AI so much more. Our coverage is going to continue. We got Reid Hoffman joining us a little bit later in our program. He's the guy behind LinkedIn. He's the guy behind PayPal.
LinkedIn.
You've heard of it. He's going all in on AI. Hey, we're going to have much more from the rooftop here in San Francisco at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in just a few minutes. First up, though, a check on world and national news. Amy Morris is in the Bloomberg 99.1 News in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country will stand alone if it has to in its war against Hamas, threatening to deepen a crisis in relations with the United States. This after President Biden warned that he will stop additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if the country goes ahead with a ground invasion of Rafah. Some Republican senators say they're crafting a resolution condemning the president for his decision to suspend the shipment. The Pentagon has teamed up with SpaceX to block Russia from Starlink. Now, Russia's used Starlink in its war in Ukraine. Outgoing Assistant Secretary John Plum tells Bloomberg the U.S. has been heavily involved in working with SpaceX and Ukraine to counter Russia's use of Starlink terminals. He says Russia will keep trying, but that the U.S., Starlink, and Ukraine will stop them. Adult film actress Stormy Daniels has now wrapped her testimony in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. Trump's lawyer told the judge he plans to renew its call for a mistrial based on Daniels' testimony and that they'll seek to prevent former Playboy model Carrie McDougal from testifying. The judge said the jury would be dismissed at 4 this afternoon, after which he will take up the defense's arguments. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stenevec live here at the Bloomberg Technology Summit in San Francisco. Yep, we're on a roof. It's beautiful outside. It's always beautiful in San Francisco.
I got news for you. This is California, okay?
It is California.
Doesn't matter what day it is.
Says the guy from California.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Listen, we're going to continue our conversations, and I'm assuming AI is going to creep into a lot of what's to come.
Well, you were just at Milken.
I was.
And there was actually this year a ton of AI at Milken. Elon Musk was there. Didn't talk Tesla at all.
Not at all.
Quite a bit about AI, though.
He did. And I was looking at some of my notes in terms of what he said, and he talked so much about We don't want AI that's brittle. And he said AI might be the most important question of all time. And he said we need to build AI that's safe for us. Interesting from the guy who kind of lives a little bit on the edge. But he was part of OpenAI, right,
Yeah.
to begin with.
And his concern is that the guardrails aren't in place when it comes to AI. And he's got a different view than a lot of other folks who say, okay, well, he's sort of a doomer when it comes to AI. He's like a science fiction guy.
Interesting.
There are people on the other side who see, limitless possibilities and don't necessarily need those guardrails.
And it's interesting to hear about the guardrails. This is the guy who really, like, if you think about what he did to the EV world and kind of awakened it when everybody said it was going to take much longer. He's the guy who wants to develop Mars, thinks, I don't want to abandon Earth, but I want to develop also another planet. But he said AI, it's got to be taught not to lie, nor things that are not true. Like, this is important that we treat, that AI, in terms of the information we get from it, that it's accurate, that it's true.
Here's what I'll say.
What are the guardrails necessary to do that?
You know what Mars doesn't have?
Guardrails?
Sunny rooftops with the ocean over there and mountains behind us. That's what Mars doesn't have.
Well, I think about the conversation we're going to have with Reid Hoffman. Like, all of a sudden, people are saying, LinkedIn, look at it. It's a safe space to kind of have real conversations, accuracy, truths, if you will. I don't know. We're going to see what he has to say about AI going forward.
All right, looking forward to that. Don't go anywhere because you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. You're watching Bloomberg Business Week. Up next on Bloomberg TV, it's The Close on radio. It's Bloomberg Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we are just 1 hour away from the closing bell on this Thursday. We've got stocks. They're moving up. We're seeing some enthusiasm. We're going to talk markets in just a moment, but I'm Carol Masser. He's Tim Stenevec. We're Bloomberg Business Week. We're in San Francisco live from the Bloomberg Tech Summit, so we're all in on technology today.
Yeah, all in on technology, all in on AI. We got a great program coming up over the next 2 hours. He co-founded LinkedIn. He built PayPal. He was the first investor in OpenAI. He's on the board of Microsoft. He's a best-selling author. He's got a podcast out. We're talking about Reid Hoffman. He's going all in on AI. He's going to be joining us a little bit later in our program.
Can't wait for that conversation. Also can't wait for the conversation with the billionaire behind quantum space, intuitive machines, Axiom Space, Cam Kafarian. He's going to be joining us. We've got a lot of questions that we want to kind of dig into with him. Again, it's like, what's happening now, what's going to happen, and what's the time frame for all of the changes in technology and innovation?
Well, you were just talking about the risks that Elon Musk sees when it comes to AI. There's a panel here today focused on the risks of AI when it comes to business, but not just the risks, the opportunities as well. That's with Anthony Aguirre. He's the executive director of the Future of Life Institute. He's going to be joining us in just a few minutes as well.
Yeah, I got to say, coming off of Milken, like, a lot of folks are trying to figure out, what does AI mean in terms of how we work going forward? What does it mean for jobs? How do we work with AI? There's a lot of questions. We're also going to get into a little bit more in terms of the ones to watch. We talked about that with Rachel Metz. Some of the people that maybe you haven't heard of, but you probably should keep your eye on. So they're coming up over the next couple of hours.
All that and more over the next 2 hours. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet in New York.
Thank you very much, Tim and Carol. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher as we move into the final hour of trading on this Thursday. Right now, the S&P trading just about at session highs, 52.11 right now, a gain of 23 points, up by about 0.5%. The Dow up 306. That is a gain of 0.8%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 50 now, higher by 0.3%. Broad-based rally here with the Russell 2000 advancing 0.7%. 10-year 4.44%. We have got the 2-year now yielding 4.80%. Spot gold up 1.2%, 23.37 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 79.46 a barrel. Bottom line here, stock market on track for its highest close in a month, adding to a rebound that has been fueled by speculation the Federal Reserve will cut rates this year. As for the inflation backdrop and how that is playing into sentiment, Katie Kaminsky is Chief Research Strategist at Alpha Simplex Group.
Just thinking about the fact that you could start to see a steepening in the yield curve. We have seen a little bit of that recently, and so I think that has made people a little concerned that, this inflation narrative could be even stickier than they would like, and thus, it's harder to navigate for equities, making that more questionable.
Katie Kaminsky of Alpha Simplex. Earnings news, Airbnb sliding the most in a year after the home rental company gave lackluster guidance for a second straight quarter. Airbnb down now by 6.3%. Also after earnings, ARM holding shares tumbling after the chip designer gave a lukewarm revenue forecast for the fiscal year. ARM right now down by 1.5%. Recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 23, holding above 5,200, 5,211 right now, a gain of 0.4%. Back we go to the Bloomberg Tech Summit in San Francisco. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thank you so much for that update. We certainly appreciate it. Well, Cake Ventures is a pre-seed and seed venture capital firm. It focuses on investing in demographic changes that are driven by tomorrow's internet users. So what that means as far as where they put their money. There's a company out there called Rares, where you can invest in sneakers and collectibles. Bright, it's an AI-powered workforce training platform. And then it comes to behavioral health. The platform is called Most Days. That's among other investments that they've made.
I love the idea of demographics. I really think it's you kind of figure out what are the trends, not only of today, but really more importantly of tomorrow. With us right now is Monique Woodward. She's founding partner, managing partner at Cake Ventures. Welcome, welcome. So nice to be talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When you think about demographics, right, you can dice and slice it, Monique, so many different ways. What are the demographics that you really like to focus on in today's environment?
So the Cake Ventures thesis around demographics is really based on a few different layers. The first layer is aging and longevity. There's 10,000 people turning 65 every single day in this country alone. And there's this massive opportunity to help them use technology to make their lives better as they age. Second layer of the cake is the increased spending power of women and how the female dollar drives companies to billion-dollar-plus outcomes. And then the third is the shift to majority-minority, where people of color as a broad group, primarily Latino, Asian, and Black, become a majority in the United States and are already a global majority.
You know, it's really fascinating. I keep talking about this. I was just back from Milken, and I had to moderate a panel, and it was called Thriving in Disruption.
You did several panels, I will point out.
But what was interesting in our prep call, so here I have somebody from real estate, from venture, private equity guy, private credit guy, somebody who's in, trading every day on a platform over at Citadel Securities. And what they wanted to talk about was longevity and the aspect of how it's going to impact things like pension obligations, how we live, the kind of housing we need, whether we bring older people back into the workforce. What are the important conversations that you think we need to be thinking about when it comes to longevity and how that shapes specifically your investments?
I think the big conversation right now is around how do we live longer, right? But I think that's just touching the surface of longevity. It's really about how do we use technology to give people better lives at older ages as they get older, right? How do we use technology to enhance their lives, help them age in place without moving into a nursing home or retirement home? And how do we give them better lives after 60 as they had when they were in their 20s and 30s?
I'm wondering about the third theme that you touched on in terms of demographics, the idea of investments in companies that are not necessarily geared toward people of color, but take this demographic into account. Here we are in Silicon Valley, not necessarily the most diverse place when it comes to where venture capital is deployed. I think that's fair to say. How do you think about that in terms of where you're putting your money, in terms of the opportunities that are out there? Because I think a big criticism that folks have about venture capitalists is, they're always just trying to solve problems that they have. Like,
it's true.
How do we get to Tahoe faster, right? to get a ski day in.
Ouch.
I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I mean, it's like, it's like, that's
you're
a
right.
common criticism.
So one of the categories that I do a lot of investing in is the future of deskless work. 80% of the labor market is actually deskless work, non-office work that doesn't happen in an office, healthcare jobs, construction jobs, service worker jobs. As you might expect, a lot of these jobs over-index in women and people of color. And so I think that AI and new technologies are going to be really important in accelerating the adoption of those jobs, but also accelerating the efficiency of those jobs. And so I think we're at this really important inflection point where we can use technology to improve the lives of healthcare workers, improve the lives of service workers. And we haven't been doing it because, to your point, a lot of the people who have been building technology, they come from a knowledge worker background. So their immediate thought is to build future work products, software for knowledge workers. But these massive opportunities that happen in healthcare, in construction, in manufacturing, and those jobs are often held by people of color.
You know, I'm watching Brad Stone up on stage with Amica, the robot, and I'm thinking about in terms of healthcare, like whether or not there is some way. I mean, one of the other trends that came out of Milken is that there's shortage of healthcare workers in particular. And I do wonder, is there some way in technology innovation that we can assist those folks who actually have to do things and care for people, or whether, because we're facing shortages in a big way in that industry?
Well, we're already seeing it in companies like Abridge, which raises Series C in order to use the conversations between healthcare workers and their patients and convert them into usable data. So we're already seeing AI being really useful in the lives of healthcare workers.
Right.
I'm very skeptical about the use of robotics in actual patient to healthcare worker interactions, but I do think that AI is useful in freeing up the job of the healthcare worker in order to make those patient interactions much more robust, much more, have a lot more depth. And so I think we're far away from robots doing that job, but I think we're in the AI doing that job.
I guess also maybe cut down on error too. When you're talking to a doc, I mean, this is something I recently noticed. When you're trying to describe like a pain that you're having to a doctor or some sort of symptoms, I mean, they're essentially serving the function of AI. What they're doing is, you know, they're saying, okay, well, you have this, this, and this. Right. Here's your family history. They're taking all these data points and they're trying to diagnose you with something that you have. It's so easy to see how that could be better served by something in the cloud.
Exactly.
Or at least augmented in some way.
Augmented.
Not the interaction
I think that's what we're looking for within healthcare in particular. We are looking for technology to augment the already great skills that these nurses, nurse practitioners, and doctors already have. We're not looking to replace them with robots, but give them additional tools that make their jobs more efficient and allow them to spend more of that one-on-one time with patients.
The whole idea of adjacent, right, in terms of AI. Monique, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming by.
Thank you so much for having me.
Some time with our audience.
Thanks a lot.
Monique Woodward, she is founding partner and managing partner at Cake Ventures, joining us here at the Bloomberg Technology Summit. But these are some of the discussions and technologies, like figuring out what does it mean for our workplace. I mean, you and I kind of joke about it, kid about it, but if we could get an assistant kind of writing our scripts on a daily basis, I wouldn't mind that.
I was thinking about that a lot yesterday.
I did get an assist.
When I was working.
His name was
but to be fair, I mean, you were literally, 10 hours of sleep in the past 4 days because of what you were doing. But the truth is, there are a lot of repetitive tasks out there.
Yeah.
It would be great to see some of those be replaced by machines. So people, look, I oftentimes think about this conversation in the context of other big historical shifts when it comes to the types of work that people did 100 years ago versus the type of work we're doing now, right? We don't need a horse and buggy to get us from place to place, so what was replaced, and what did that allow people to do? What did the steam engine allow people to do? Does this thing stick the way that, the proponents of it say it will?
I'm not even going to go back that far. I think about when I started out in journalism, when I needed research, I was on the phone with folks in the government, like Commerce Department, can you FedEx overnight or send me research for my reports?
Like not emailing it to you.
Not even necessarily
not attaching
email.
a PDF.
It's amazing the stuff that I used to get in the mail. And now I just go on the internet and I just pull it right up. So you just think about that transition. It's made my job a lot easier. And I do feel like that access to information is freeing. How incredible that is. That's something Elon talked about. He was talking up Starlink, but he said that's the great leveler in terms of creating internet access to everybody around the world. That means everybody can get an education. MIT, find their courses online, like you think about things like that. But I feel like with this next level of AI, I'm not quite so sure, but it could be pretty cool.
Those are the good things that
Those
can
are the
happen.
good things.
We think, and that was the promise of the internet. But look, the internet's also been used for a lot of really bad stuff. I mean, we had the cover of Bloomberg Business Week recently, talking about the way that social media platforms are becoming places where teenage boys essentially have been held hostage, and it's led to some really disturbing outcomes.
All right.
Again, all as a result of the internet.
All right. So two sides to every coin, and this is what we want to get into because here at the Bloomberg Technology Summit, there's a workshop going on. It's called Addressing AI Risks in Business, and we have a great voice to talk to us about that. Anthony Aguirre is Executive Director of the Future of Life Institute, joining us on site. Thank you so much for coming by with us. We are trying to figure out technology, AI, what it means for our workplace, for our life in general. What are some of the biggest facets of that discussion or narrative that kind of occupy your mind today?
I think there are some major challenges that we have that AI is presenting us with. One is the issue of how are we going to make AI in a way that is actually safe and beneficial for society. Right now, we have AI systems that are being developed by sort of a handful of very large companies, and they're doing it in a very competitive way. So each of those companies feels like it has to develop the new, better system faster than its rivals does. We even see this on the international stage where the U.S. has rhetoric like we have to develop AI faster than our geopolitical rivals. And this is not the way...
It's a race. It's a real race.
It's a race. And a race is not the way you get something to go as safely as possible, right? The race is the way that you get things to go as quickly as possible, and speed does not necessarily equal safety. So I think one of the problems that we have to step out of this dynamic of there's a competitive race to develop more and more powerful systems, even at the expense of making sure that those systems are safe and beneficial for society. So that's issue one, I would say.
What's at stake here if those guardrails aren't in place?
I think...
Like, what's worst case scenario? Just give it to us cold, man.
I think there are short-term scenarios that we see that are worrisome and long-term ones. So I think in the short term, we see that our whole sort of information gathering and understanding and dissemination system, the ecosphere, is more or less being dismantled. Right now we are becoming awash in AI-generated content. You don't really know most of the things that you read, whether they're AI-generated or human-generated. We will soon be at the point where the pictures that you see are more or less indistinguishable between AI-generated and camera-generated. That's already sort of possible. So we have a kind of pollution of our information commons to the extent that I think we're losing track of just what is real, what is human, what is true from what isn't. And so I think that's a challenge we're going to see play out in huge
That's happening now.
That's happening now.
I mean, that's not the robots taking over. That's
right.
It's not the robots taking over, but it also isn't. It's also not the robots taking over in the sense that we are replacing human-generated culture and content with AI-generated culture and content.
How do you police that? How do you create the guardrails around that?
I think so in terms of the content generation, it's a question of having ways to verify that something is authentic, that is real, that is true, that is human-generated, ways to detect and ways to label things that aren't, and having the technical systems that allow people to access that information. So it should be the case that if I go online and read a news article, I should know whether it's AI written or not. I should know whether a fact in it is true, and if it's claimed to be true, how do I know that it's true? I should be able to go back to like the camera that took that picture.
How do you do that?
Well, it's all possible technically. I mean, the social systems and the rules and the market demand to bring those things into the way we actually
use automation at Bloomberg. Bloomberg
and
News,
that's always noted.
And it's noted at the top.
Yeah.
It says this article was written with the assistance of Bloomberg Automation. I mean, not everybody does that, though, I guess.
Right. So
should there be a rule, a law?
Of course. I mean, there should certainly be certain rules about fake information. So I think it should not be legal to generate non-consensual deepfakes of people that they didn't authorize, whether they're sexual deepfakes or political deepfakes or fraudulent business, deepfakes.
Are you talking to politicians right now to make this a reality?
We are, yeah. So there are lots of bills in Congress that are pursuing the deepfakes issue. I think some of them are underpowered in the sense that they predominantly put the onus on content creators not to create deepfakes, but they don't put the onus on developers not to create the tools for deepfakes, and not necessarily enough on platforms to make sure that they label things correctly. So I think we need lots of things there. Some of those will happen by themselves because the market will require it. Some of them will be required. We will need regulations and laws for it.
I'm just kind of a little terrified thinking about social media and the amount of news information that's not accurate, that's already out there, and we've not done a great job policing that. So I'm crossing my fingers, crossing everything.
We need to do a little better this time. We could do a little better.
Maybe we've learned.
We'll see. We'll check in with you in a little while and see if we've done a better job.
But the broader question, so you asked about the long term and the short term.
So we'll see. We'll see if we can pull it off. All right, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. That's Anthony Aguirre, Executive Director of the Future of Life Institute here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit.
Hey, let's not forget we've got a trading day underway. We've seen stocks move up. Coming up next, we talk markets, drive to the close, are coming your way with Amanda Agati at PNC Bank. That is next on Bloomberg Business.